The first thing you notice is the light. It seeps through the wool felt of the djur walls, not as a beam but as a slow change in the darkness, from black to charcoal, then to a grey so soft it barely has a name. The smoke hole at the roof's centre, covered for the night with a flap of felt, now shows a faint circle of pale sky, and that circle is gradually brightening. The air inside the djur is cool and still, carrying the dry scent of old wool and the faint, pleasant tang of last night's juniper fire. Under the heavy blanket, your body is warm and your breathing is slow. You do not open your eyes right away. Instead you listen, because on the steppe the sounds of morning arrive before the full sun. Somewhere beyond the felt walls, a sheep bleats once, a low nasal call that seems to float across the grass. A second sheep answers, further away, and then a third, until a scattered chorus rises and falls like a conversation you have heard every day of your life. Beneath the sheep you catch the continuous whisper of wind moving through the steppe grasses, a sound so constant that it becomes a silence of its own, a presence rather than a noise. The wind presses gently against the djur, making the felt sigh against the wooden lattice. It is all as familiar as your own heartbeat. Your hands, lying still on the coarse wool of the blanket, feel stiff. The fingers are slow to curl when you finally try to move them. You open your eyes fully and see the interior of the djur gathering shape. The low wooden frame radiating outward from the central hearthstones, the chest holding your belongings, the smaller leather pouches hanging from the lattice. The fire is out now, only a pile of white ash in the ring of stones, but a thin trace of warmth still hovers in the air near the hearth. You push the blanket down to your waist, then sit up slowly, feeling the slight ache in your back from a night spent on the felt-covered ground. The motion is unhurried. There is no reason to jump up, no urgent task calling. The day ahead is one long, single piece of time given entirely to working leather, and you will begin it when your body is ready. So you sit for a moment on your sleeping pallet, letting your mind drift while your eyes wander over the familiar objects of the djer. The wooden saddle tree, the one you started shaping yesterday, rests on a piece of leather near the door flap, exactly where you left it. It waits without impatience. You dress without rising fully, reaching for the felt coat folded at the foot of your bed. It is a simple garment, undyed and unadorned, the color of dry grass. The wool is thick and greasy, lanolin making it slightly water-resistant, and carrying the smell of sheep, a smell so deeply part of your world that you hardly notice it. You pull the coat over your long undershirt and tie the sash around your waist, letting the excess fabric hang loose. Soft felt boots come next, their soles padded for riding and walking on grass. Once dressed, you fold your blanket and set it aside, then stand, bending slightly to avoid the low roof. Your body knows the djur's dimensions perfectly. You move without needing to watch your head. At the door, a low wooden threshold under a flap of felt, you crouch and push the flap aside, stepping out into the open. The steppe greets you as it always does, with space. The sky is so wide and so low that it seems to begin just above your head, and stretch outward forever, pressing the earth into a flat disk of green and gold. At this early hour the sun has not yet climbed above the eastern rim of the world, but its light spills upward, painting the undersides of the thin clouds in shades of rose and pale orange. The clouds themselves are arranged in long, loose rows, like wool carded out thin and laid across the blue. They drift from east to west with the wind, unhurried, and their shadows move over the grassland in gentle, silent patches, darkening a stretch of grass here, lighting it again there. You stand just outside the Djur, feet on the packed earth that serves as your doorstep, and take a deep breath. The air is cool and clean, and it tastes of distance. There is the dry mineral scent of the soil, the green sharpness of the grass, the earthier note of dung from the horse herd nearby. Mixed into all of that is a faint, smoky trace from last night's cooking fire, still clinging to the back of your throat. It is the smell of home. A few paces to your left, your neighbour's Djer stands white against the grass, its smoke hole trailing a thin wisp of smoke from a newly lit fire. Further off, perhaps 50 paces, you see the flock of sheep moving slowly across the grass, a mass of dirty white wool punctuated by the darker shapes of goats. The herder, a boy you know by name, sits on his pony at the edge of the flock, a small dark figure against the immensity of the sky. His voice reaches you as a faint murmur, a wordless encouragement to the animals. You turn away from the view and walk the short path to the stream. This path is simply a line of slightly flattened grass that you and your family have worn over the seasons, curving down a gentle slope to where the water moves over a bed of smooth pebbles. As you walk, the grass swishes against your boots, releasing a fresh green scent. The stream itself is narrow, no wider than a man's outstretched arms, and shallow enough that the water makes a soft, rippling music over the stones. It runs down from the distant foothills, from snowmelt you cannot see, and its water is always cold, even in the height of summer. You crouch at the edge, resting one hand on the bank, and look into the clear water for a moment. Tiny black water beetles dart between the pebbles, their movements sudden and purposeless. Then you cup your hands together and dip them into the stream, bringing up a pool of cold water. You bend forward and splash it onto your face. The shock of cold makes your skin tighten instantly, pulling your cheeks and forehead taut. Your breath catches for just a second, then steadies. You splash again, rubbing your eyes, the bridge of your nose, the back of your neck where sweat can gather later in the day. The water runs down your collar and seeps into the wool of your coat, leaving a dark, wet stain. You stay crouched there for a minute longer, watching the water flow, feeling the cold seep into your fingers and wrists. Then you stand, wipe your wet hands on the front of your coat, and turn back toward the Djur, feeling more awake, your skin tingling in the morning air. Back at your workspace, you pause for a moment and look around. The workspace is not a room or a building, simply a patch of ground beside the Djur that you have claimed for your craft. The grass here is permanently flattened, worn down to bare earth in the center where you always sit. Around the edges, a few hardy plants still grow, their leaves dusted with the fine brown powder of old leather shavings. Yesterday you left your tools out, covered with a square of felt to keep the dew from rusting the metal. You crouch and fold back the felt, revealing the collection beneath. They are laid out on a large scarred piece of saddle leather that serves as both a mat and a protector for the tools. You take each tool and set it in its place on the leather, a small ritual you perform without thought. The awl, a pointed iron rod set into a wooden handle worn smooth by your palm, goes at the top left. Beside it, the curved needles, their tips sharp, and their eyes elongated to hold thick sinew. There are 3 needles, each a slightly different size. You check each one for rust, finding none. Next, the block of beeswax, a dull yellow lump in a small clay dish, gives off a faint honeyed smell when the sun touches it. The bone folder, a flat piece of polished bone used for creasing and smoothing leather, lies next to the wax. It is cool and heavy in your hand when you pick it up, its surface veined with tiny natural cracks that have darkened over time. You set it down gently. The spool of sinew, soaked and ready from yesterday, is still pliable. You give it a soft tug and it holds. The small iron knife, its blade wrapped in a leather sheath, goes at the top right. Finally, the wooden saddle tree, the birchwood frame that will eventually become the heart of a saddle, you lift from the ground and place in the center of the workspace, directly in front of where you will sit. It is shaped like a simplified horse's back, with 2 long sidebars connected by the curved pommel arch at the front and the slightly lower cantle arch at the back. The wood is pale and smooth, smelling of the distant forest where the birch once grew, a smell clean and dry and entirely different from the grass. You run your hand over the sidebar, feeling the slight undulation where the wood was shaped to match your horse's spine. Satisfied that everything is in order, you sink down to the ground, folding your legs beneath you in the cross-legged position that will hold you for most of the day. For a long moment, you do not begin to work. You simply sit, hands resting on your knees, face turned toward the eastern horizon. The sun has just now broken free of the earth's rim, and its first direct rays, a warm golden light, spill across the steppe and wash over you. The heat is subtle but immediate, a gentle pressure on your eyelids and cheekbones. You feel the stiffness in your shoulders begin to loosen. The sky, which was pale rose and orange, is now shifting into a clear pale blue, the clouds thinning out to mere white streaks high up. The wind has softened as it often does at sunrise. Now only a light breath that stirs the grass tips and passes over your face like a cool cloth. In the distance, you can see the line of a low hill, a gentle rise that marks the edge of your family's usual grazing land. Nothing moves upon it except the shadow of a hawk, a tiny dark speck, gliding in wide circles. The hawk calls once, a high, thin cry that carries for a long time across the quiet air. You find your thoughts drifting, not to any particular memory or plan, but simply resting on the surface of things. You notice the way the light catches the wool fibers of your sleeve, turning them into tiny golden threads. You notice the pattern of cracks in the dry earth beside your knee, how they form a rough hexagon like the shell of a tortoise. You notice your own breathing, steady and deep, your chest rising and falling beneath the felt coat. The saddle tree in front of you waits, and you know every step of the work ahead, unrolling a new hide, checking it for flaws, marking the pieces with charcoal, cutting along the lines with the iron knife, stitching the layers together with sinew and needle, shaping the leather over the frame, smoothing the edges, oiling the surface. All of it will happen in its own time. There is no need to rush any part of it. The sun will move across the sky, the shadow of the jur will lengthen, and by evening the saddle will be further along than it is now. That is how days pass here. Eventually, you reach out and pull the larger leather tool mat closer, positioning it so that everything is within easy arm's reach. You examine the wooden saddle tree one more time, tilting it to see the join where the sidebar meets the pommel arch. The woodworker who made it did a fine job. The joint is tight, sealed with glue made from boiled fish skins invisible to the eye. You set the frame down again and instead pick up the small iron knife, sliding it from its sheath. The blade is dark with age but sharp along its edge. You test it with your thumb, feeling the slight catch of the metal against your skin, then wipe it once with the hem of your coat to remove any dust. It is ready. You set it back on the leather mat, aligning it precisely with the other tools. There is a quiet pleasure in this preparation, a sense of everything being in its correct place. You pour yourself a small cup of cool water from a leather flask. Drink it slowly, feeling the liquid travel down your throat and settle in your stomach. The sheep have moved farther down the valley now, their calls fading to an occasional distant note. The sun is fully up, the last of the morning chill gone from the air. The day has begun, but it is still young and full of silence. You place your palms on your knees, close your eyes for just a moment, listening to the wind's soft passage, and then you open them again and look at the leather hide that you will unroll next. It sits in the jar, rolled tightly and tied with a leather cord, waiting. You will fetch it when you are ready. For now it is enough to sit here on the flattened grass, under the wide and tender sky, with the tools laid out before you and the whole uninterrupted day stretched out ahead like the steppe itself. The decision to begin comes not as a sudden impulse, but as a natural shift in the rhythm of the morning, like the moment when the breeze changes direction. You rise from your cross-legged seat on the packed earth, your knees cracking softly as you straighten your legs. The tools remain behind on the worn leather mat, glinting faintly in the strengthening sunlight, and you leave them there with the quiet confidence that they will wait exactly as they are, untouched, until your return. Turning away from the workspace, you cross the few paces to the felt-covered door of the jar, your soft boots making no sound on the grass. The door flap hangs heavy and still in the windless air, its lower edge darkened by months of brushing against the ground. You lift it with one hand, ducking your head as you step back into the interior shade. After the brightness of the open steppe, the inside of the jar feels almost like entering water. The light is dim and amber, filtered through the wool felt walls until it takes on a golden brown quality, as if the air itself were the color of weak tea. The smell wraps around you immediately, a layered scent of old smoke trapped in the ceiling felt, the greasy richness of raw wool, the dry dustiness of the earthen floor, and beneath it all the faint animal sweetness of the leather goods stored in their various corners. The central hearthstones stand cold and pale, a ring of smooth river rocks enclosing a mound of grey ash that still holds the faintest memory of warmth. Above, the smoke hole is a bright circle of blue sky, a perfect disk of light that sends a single column of sunbeams down into the center of the jar, illuminating the floating dust motes that drift and turn in lazy spirals. You pause just inside the door to let your eyes adjust, and in that pause the quiet of the interior settles around you, a stillness deeper than the already quiet steppe outside. The storage chest sits against the northern wall, away from the door and the hearth, a position chosen to keep its contents cool and dry. It is a simple box made from planks of weathered pine fitted together with wooden pegs rather than iron nails, its corners reinforced with strips of rawhide that have hardened over the years into something like bone. The lid is heavy, and you lift it with both hands, leaning it back against the felt wall. Inside, the chest is packed neatly with the materials of your trade. each rolled hide and bundle of sinew stored so that nothing is crushed or creased. The smell that rises from the open chest is potent and clean, the cured leather, the faint smokiness, the dusty sweetness of dried plant fibers used for certain cordage. You reach down and take hold of the rolled horsehide that you knew would be there, the one you set aside weeks ago for this very saddle. Your fingers close around its thickness, and you lift it out, cradling it in both arms. The roll is heavy, perhaps the weight of a small child, and it is stiff from being bound tightly for so long. A leather cord, dark with age and polished smooth by handling, wraps around it in a figure-8 pattern, tied off with a simple loop knot. You carry the rolled hide across the gyre, stepping carefully over the hearthstones and duck back out through the door into the open air. The transition from shade to sunlight is always a small shock, a sudden flood of warmth on your face and shoulders. You carry the hide away from the gyre toward the flat workspace, but instead of setting it down on the tool mat, you continue a few paces further onto the grass, where the ground is even and open to the sky. Here, with no shadow from the gyre to fall across your work, you will have the best possible light for examining the leather. You lower the roll to the ground carefully, setting it down on its side, and crouch beside it. The grass here is long enough to tickle your wrists as you work. The rolled hide, freed from the darkness of the chest, now shows its outer surface to the sun. Even in its rolled state, you can see the grain of the leather along the exposed edge, a fine pattern of tiny natural pores and faint wrinkles that speak of the horse's life before this hide became a material. It is a map of an animal you never knew, but whose strength and movement will live on in the saddle you make. You find the end of the leather cord and work it loose, the knot releasing with a soft tug. As you unwind the cord, the coils fall away in a series of gentle spirals on the grass, and you set the cord aside to be used again later. The hide, no longer constrained, relaxes slightly but remains in a tight cylinder from its months of storage. You take hold of one edge and begin to unroll it across the grass, working slowly, guiding the leather with both hands so it does not fold or kink. The sound it makes as it unrolls is a low continuous rustle, the same sound of stiff fabric being spread over a bed, amplified by the size and weight of the material. As each new section flattens out, the underside reveals itself, paler and slightly rough, the suited side that will eventually face inward against a horse's back. The top side, the smooth grain, stays hidden for now, pressed against the grass. When the hide lies in a loose, uneven sheet, you walk around the far edge and flip it over, turning the entire heavy length so the grain side faces the sky. The effort makes you breathe deeper for a moment, and you feel the warmth of exertion in your shoulders. Now it lies fully open, a large irregular oval of horsehide, perhaps as long as a man is tall and nearly as wide at its broadest point. You stand beside it and look down, taking in the whole shape. It is not perfect, and you do not expect it to be. A real hide, taken from a living animal, always carries the record of that life. The edges are wavy and uneven, following the original contours of the animal's body. There are areas where the thickness varies, and patches where the hair was once a different color, now preserved as faint darker or lighter shadows in the leather. You walk slowly around the perimeter of the hide, your eyes tracing every inch. The sun, now higher and warmer, throws a sharp, clear light that reveals every detail. You see a small, puckered scar near what would have been the shoulder, perhaps from a thorn or an old injury that healed before the animal came to its end. There is a cluster of tiny pinprick marks, the sign of insect bites from summers long ago, so shallow that they barely dimple the grain. There is a darker streak, almost like a stripe, where the hair was once a richer brown. All of these marks are simply information, data that you will use to decide where each saddle piece should be cut, avoiding the thin spots and placing the strongest, thickest areas under the parts that will bear the most weight. You lower yourself to your knees beside the hide, then settle back onto your heels. From this closer angle, the leather fills your vision entirely, a landscape of texture and color. You reach out and place your right palm flat on the surface, and the first touch is always a moment of quiet communion. The leather is cool despite the sun, having retained the shade temperature of the chest. It is smooth but not slick. The natural grain offers a slight resistance, a fine texture that you can feel with even the lightest touch. You press down slightly and feel the firm resilience of the material, the way it pushes back against your hand without yielding too much. It is a strong hide, well cured, with enough body to hold its shape for decades of riding. You move your palm slowly across the surface, traveling from the thicker spine area outward toward the belly edge. And as you move, you feel the gradual thinning, the way the leather becomes more pliable and slightly looser. This is how a hide works. The back and shoulders are the densest. The belly and flanks are softer and stretchier. You will use the dense areas for the seat and the stirrup straps, the softer areas for the skirts and decorative elements. Your hand pauses when it encounters the scar you noticed earlier. Your fingertip traces its outline, a raised line of harder tissue, and you test its flexibility by pressing down. It holds firm, no cracking, no weakness. Good. You move on, exploring every notable feature, reading the hide with your fingers the way a herder reads the weather in the clouds. After you've covered the entire surface with your hands, you lean forward and bring your face close to the leather. The smell is the truest test of a cure, and you inhale deeply, drawing the scent into the back of your throat. It is earthy and rich, the deep animal smell transformed by months of smoking into something warmer and cleaner. The smoke used to cure this hide came from a fire of dried dung and certain aromatic shrubs, and those notes are still present, a faint sharpness like burnt herbs, a dry woody undertone, and the ever-present sweetness of well-aged leather. There is no sourness, no hint of rot or damp, and that tells you the hide was properly stored through the winter. You exhale slowly, your breath disturbing a tiny bit of dust on the leather's surface, and you sit up again, satisfied. This hide will serve well. The inspection complete, you rise and gather 4 smooth stones from the pile you keep near the stream. These are river stones, rounded by centuries of water, each one about the size of your 2 fists together. You carry them 2 at a time and place them at the corners of the hide, weighing the edges down so the breeze cannot lift and fold the leather while you work. The stones rest there like small guardians, their grey surfaces speckled with darker flecks of mica that sparkle faintly in the sun. With the hide secured, you step back and look at it once more, now seeing not just a sheet of leather, but the ghostly outlines of the saddle pieces waiting to be cut. The long side panels will come from along the spine, where the leather is thickest, the cantle cover from the shoulder area with its good dense grain, the pommel from the rump region, curved and strong. You do not mark anything yet, but your mind is already arranging the shapes, fitting them together like a puzzle whose solution you have learned through years of practice. The morning's work so far has made you aware of a dryness in your throat, and the sun's steady climb has brought the day to its first real warmth. It is time for tea. Near the chair you keep a small cooking fire burning throughout the day, a low bed of embers that you feed with dried dung chips whenever the heat begins to fade. You walk over to it now, your shadow a short dark shape on the grass. The fire pit is a shallow depression ringed with soot-blackened stones, and within it the dung embers glow a deep orange red, pulsing faintly as the breeze passes over them. No flame is visible, only the intense internal heat. You add 2 more dung chips, placing them carefully on the embers, and then you lean down and blow gently at the base of the fire. Your breath feeds the embers, and a small yellow flame flickers up, licking the edge of the new fuel. A thin line of pale smoke rises, carrying the distinctive sweet bitter smell of burning dung, a smell that every person on the steppe knows as the scent of home. You fetch the small iron kettle, a simple vessel blackened with soot and dented on one side from a long-ago fall from a horse. It is already half full of water from the morning's trip to the stream, and you set it on the metal tripod that stands over the fire. The tripod's legs are uneven, and the kettle hangs at a slight angle, but it has worked this way for years, and there is no reason to adjust it. While the water heats, you walk back to the jar and collect your tea supplies, a small leather pouch of pressed tea leaves, dark and crumbly, and a stoppered gourd that holds milk from the mares, thick and slightly sour from a day of natural fermentation. You also take your personal cup, a wooden bowl worn smooth and stained dark from countless pourings. With these items in hand, you return to the fire and settle down onto your heels, waiting. The water takes its time to boil. You watch the surface for the first tiny bubbles that cling to the iron sides, then the gentle shimmer that spreads across the water, and finally the soft rolling boil that sends a wisp of steam into the air. You crumble a pinch of tea leaves into the water, then add a splash of milk and a small pinch of rock salt from a pouch at your belt. The tea darkens to a milky brown, and the scent rises, savory and comforting. You pour the tea into your wooden cup, blowing across the surface to cool it, and then you carry the cup back to the hide. Rather than sitting on your usual work mat, you settle down right there on the grass beside the spread leather, folding your legs beneath you. The grass makes a soft cushion, and you feel the slight springiness of the living earth under the felt of your boots. You raise the cup to your lips and take the first slow sip. The tea is hot and salty and rich, coating your tongue with a film of milk fat and the bitterness of strong leaves. It warms a path down your throat and settles in your stomach, spreading a gentle heat outward through your chest. You take another sip, then lower the cup to your knee, cradling it in both hands. The hide stretches before you, held flat by its 4 grey stone weights, and you let your eyes wander across it while you drink. The sun has now climbed high enough that the shadows of the stones are short and crisp, dark charcoal-grey pools on the golden brown leather. A small fly lands on the hide near the edge, walks a few jerky steps, then lifts off again into the breeze. Beyond the hide, the steppe rolls away in all directions, grass rippling in slow waves like the surface of a shallow sea. The sky above is a pale, washed blue, with a single long cloud stretching from north to south like a trail of wool caught on a thorn. You track its slow movement, watching it thin and stretch as the upper winds pull it apart. There is no urgency anywhere in this world, nothing that demands to be finished before a certain hour. The tea cools in your cup, and you drink the last of it, the dregs leaving a fine silt of tea leaves at the bottom. You set the cup aside on the grass and wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. For a while longer you simply sit, looking at the hide and the sky and the land between them, feeling the day settle into its long middle stretch. The hide is ready, you are ready, and there is still so much time. The tea leaves at the bottom of your wooden cup are still damp, clinging together in a small dark mass. You tilt the cup to look at them without any particular reason, then set it aside on the grass beside the hide. The sun has now fully cleared the morning hazes, and its light falls with a clarity that makes every edge sharp and distinct. The leather before you, held flat by its 4 grey stone weights, glows in a dozen shades of brown, from the deep chestnut of the spine area to the pale fawn of the belly edges. The time has come to begin transferring the shapes from your mind onto this open canvas. You rise from the grass, your legs feeling the pleasant stretch after the long stillness, and you walk back to the workspace where your tools lie waiting on the worn leather mat. Among the needles and the awl and the beeswax, you keep a small supply of charcoal sticks. They are not made from any special wood, but from the same shrubs that grow near the stream, cut to finger length and slowly burned in a covered clay pot until they become pure black carbon, light as a dry bird bone. You select one that is neither too thick nor too thin, a piece about the length of your index finger, and you examine its end. The tip is blunt from previous use, rounded and soft, incapable of making a fine mark. You will need a sharp point. For this you take up the small iron knife, the same one you will later use to cut the leather, and you hold the charcoal stick against your thumb, paring away the tip with short, controlled strokes. The knife makes a soft, scraping sound, a whisper against the charcoal, and tiny black shavings fall onto the leather mat like fine soot. You turn the stick, pare again, turn, pare, until the tip tapers to a crisp conical point that will leave a line no wider than a stalk of grass. You test it on a corner of the tool mat, drawing a short line that appears dark and even, and then you set the knife aside, returning it carefully to its place. From the mat, you also take up your measuring rule. This is a length of straight-grained birchwood, light in weight and pale in color, smoothed by years of handling until the wood feels almost silky. It is about the length of your forearm, and along its edges you have carved a series of small notches at precise intervals. These notches are not marked with numbers, for numbers are not needed. Each notch corresponds to a specific measurement of a saddle component, the width of the pommel, the depth of the cantle, the span of the sidebar, the overlap for stitching. You know them by their position and by the tiny secondary marks beside some of them, a small dot, a cross, a diagonal slash. The rule is a personal record of your craft, meaningless to anyone else but completely clear to you. You run your thumb along the edge, feeling the familiar sequence of notches, checking that no dirt has filled them. It is clean and ready. With the charcoal in one hand and the rule in the other, you walk back to the spread hide and lower yourself to your knees at its edge. The grass beneath the hide is cool, shaded from the sun by the leather, and it gives off a faint green fragrance as you settle your weight onto it. You kneel there for a moment, looking at the hide's expanse, orienting yourself. The top of the hide, where the spine once ran, is a slightly darker band stretching from left to right, and you align your body with this natural axis. You will measure and mark the largest pieces first, the side panels and the seat, taking them from the thickest, strongest part of the leather, leaving the thinner edges for the smaller straps and reinforcements. This is not a decision you make consciously. It is instinct, a pattern so deeply learned that it feels like memory rather than thought. You begin with the seat, the central piece that will rest directly over the saddle tree and bear the rider's weight. Placing the rule flat on the hide, you position one end along the spine line and extend it outward toward the belly edge, stopping when the appropriate notch aligns with the point that feels right. You press the rule down with your left hand, holding it firm so it cannot shift, and with your right hand you bring the sharp charcoal point to the leather. The first touch of the charcoal is always a delicate moment. Too much pressure and the mark will be thick and messy. Too little and it will not show clearly. You draw the point along the edge of the rule in one smooth, steady motion, leaving a fine dark line on the grain. The charcoal glides almost silently, with only the faintest gritty sound, like a dry leaf being drawn across a stone. You reach the end of the rule, lift the charcoal, and examine the line. It is straight and even, a clean black hair on the brown leather. You shift the rule forward, aligning it with the end of the previous line, and continue the mark in a long extension. When you finally pause, you have drawn a line that spans from the spine area nearly to the hide's far edge, the first boundary of the saddle seat. You move to the opposite side and repeat the process, measuring outward from the same spine point but in the other direction, creating a symmetrical second line. To ensure the symmetry is true, you pause and walk around the hide, viewing it from both ends, squinting slightly to see if the lines correspond. They do, or nearly so, and you adjust one line with a small correction, rubbing out a short section with the heel of your palm and redrawing it. The charcoal erases easily from the smooth leather, leaving only a faint grey ghost that will be cut away later. Satisfied, you turn your attention to the cross lines that will define the front and back of the seat, the pommel end, and the cantle end. You measure the distance between the two long sidelines, finding the midpoint, and from there you measure forward and backward along the spine, marking short ticks for where the curved arches will rise. Connecting these ticks requires a freehand curve, and you do this by bracing your wrist against the hide and moving the charcoal in a slow, careful arc. The curve emerges from under your hand like a crescent moon, one end meeting the left line, the other meeting the right. You do this twice, once for the pommel arch at the front and once for the cantle arch at the back, the two curves facing away from each other, enclosing the rectangular space of the seat. The charcoal lines on the leather now form a complete outline, a shape that any saddle maker would recognize. With the seat outlined, you sit back on your heels and let your hand relax, the charcoal resting loosely in your fingers. A small cloud has drifted in front of the sun, and the light softens momentarily, making the charcoal marks easier to see against the leather. You take advantage of this diffused light to study your work, checking the proportions. The seat must be neither too wide, which would cause the rider to slide, nor too narrow, which would pinch the horse's spine. Your eye travels along each line, measuring not with the rule now, but with a sense of balance that you have developed over many years. One line seems slightly too far in, and you extend it outward by a thumb's width, redrawing it with the same steady hand. The old line you rub away with your thumb, the black powder smudging into a grey smear on your skin. You wipe your thumb on the grass and continue. Next come the side panels, the long skirts that will hang down from the seat and protect the horse's flanks from the stirrup straps. These are simpler shapes, essentially long rectangles with rounded corners, but they require care because they must match each other exactly. You shift your position around the hide, moving to a fresh area closer to the belly edge where the leather is slightly thinner and more flexible, suitable for skirts that need to drape rather than hold rigid shape. Kneeling now facing a different direction, you feel the warmth of the sun on your back instead of your face, and the shadow of your own head falls onto the leather before you. You use the rule to mark out two identical long forms, measuring the width at 3 points along each to ensure they are consistent. The charcoal moves in long straight strokes as you work. The sound a continuous soft scratching like a mouse in dry grass. The skirts take shape side by side on the leather, two ghostly panels waiting to be cut free. As you work, you become aware of the world beyond the hide again. The way the breeze has picked up slightly and the distant calls of birds have changed in pitch. You look up for a moment, straightening your back, and see that the cloud that dimmed the sun has passed, and the light is once again brilliant. The hide seems almost to glow under that light, and the charcoal lines stand out stark and dark, a complete diagram of the saddle to come. You shield your eyes with your hand and scan the horizon out of habit, seeing the distant flock of sheep, now much farther to the east, a smear of white on the green that moves almost imperceptibly. The herder boy is still there on his pony, a motionless dot. The sky above is clear now, the cloud having dissolved into nothing, and the blue is deepening toward that intense shade that belongs to the middle of the day. You lower your hand and return your gaze to the leather. There are smaller pieces still to mark, the pommel cover, the cantle cover, the reinforcing straps, the girth loops. You turn your attention to the off-cut areas, the spaces between and around the main pieces, because a good saddle maker wastes as little as possible. The hide is a gift from the horse, and to discard any usable part would show a lack of care. You begin to fit these smaller shapes into the remaining areas, rotating the rule and making short charcoal ticks, then connecting them into rectangles and squares and narrow bands. The pommel cover is a strip that will wrap around the front arch, the cantle cover a similar strip for the back. They are long and relatively narrow, and you find space for them along the hide's irregular top edge. The stirrup straps, thick and strong, you mark out from a particularly dense patch of leather near the shoulder scar, where the fibers are tightly woven and resistant to stretch. You mark them as double-wide strips that will later be folded over and stitched together, doubling their strength. The girth, a long band that will pass under the horse's belly, you sketch out from the longest available stretch of belly leather, a serpentine line that follows the hide's natural contour to maximize length. Each mark is made with the same slow, deliberate care, the charcoal point tracing out the future of each piece. By the time you have marked all the pieces, the hide is covered with a network of fine black lines, a geometric map overlaid on the organic pattern of the leather. It looks like a drawing of a city seen from a great height, with avenues and cross streets and small alleys, all intersecting and defining blocks of leather that will soon be separated. You rise to your feet to see the whole pattern from above, stepping back a few paces, your hands on your hips. The lines are faint, easily smudged, but they are there, and they are correct. You walk a slow circle around the hide, checking each piece one last time from different angles, confirming that nothing has been forgotten. The saddle tree still waits on the tool mat, and you glance over at it, comparing its dimensions in your mind with the markings on the leather. Yes, the seat will fit over the frame with enough allowance for stretching and tacking. The panels will hang to the correct length. The straps are positioned to align with the stirrups and girth buckles. Everything is in its place. The charcoal stick is now much shorter than it was when you began, worn down to a nub. You look at it in your palm, then reach down and set it on the grass beside the hide. There is no need to keep it. There are others in the pot, and this one has served its purpose. Your fingers are stained black, especially the pads of your thumb and forefinger, and when you rub them together, the charcoal smears into a fine dark paste mixed with the oil of your skin. You walk to the stream to rinse them, crouching at the same spot where you splashed your face this morning. The water is still cold, flowing over the same pebbles, the same water beetles darting in their purposeless patterns. You dip your hands in and rub them together, watching the black particles swirl away downstream in faint smoky ribbons. The cold water numbs your fingertips pleasantly. You cup some water and drink, then splash a little on the back of your neck where the sun has been warming you all morning. The drops run down under your collar, and you shiver once, a small involuntary shake, then stand and shake the water from your hands. Returning to the hide, you see that the breeze has lifted one corner despite the stone weight, the lighter belly leather flapping once before settling back down. You add another stone to that corner, a larger one from the pile, and press it down firmly. The hide is now fully secured, and its charcoal markings wait under the sun like a promise. The day has grown noticeably warmer, the sun now nearing its high point, and your shadow is a small dark pool directly beneath you. You feel the first edge of hunger, a gentle hollow sensation, but it is not yet time to eat. There is still work to do, and the day is long. You settle back onto the grass beside the hide, crossing your legs, and you simply look at the March leather for a while. The lines are faint but true, and in the silence of the afternoon they seem to hold everything you need to know. The knife will come next, but that is a task for another stretch of time. For now, it is enough to sit with the hide and the sky and the warm grass, resting in the quiet center of the day. The charcoal lines on the horsehide have rested under the climbing sun long enough to become familiar, their dark traces settling into the grain as if they had always been there. Now the hide waits, not with impatience but with a kind of stillness that comes from being fully prepared, and you feel a quiet pull toward the next step. From your cross-legged seat on the grass, you reach over to the leather tool mat and take up the iron knife. It is a simple tool, a straight blade about the length of your hand from heel to tip, set into a wooden handle that has been darkened by the oils of your palm over many years. The handle is racked with a thin strip of leather, wound tight and secured with a small knot, and the wrapping has worn smooth at the places where your fingers naturally rest. The blade itself is not polished to a mirror shine, but holds a deep grey patina, the surface marked with faint vertical lines from the whetstone that keep its edge true. You hold it flat on your open palm, feeling its modest weight, and then you close your fingers around the handle, testing the grip. It fits as it always does, a perfect extension of your hand. The blade is sharp, but you check this anyway, bringing the edge close to your face and tilting it so the sunlight runs along the steel. There is no visible flat spot, no dull gleam. The edge seems to disappear into a thin line of reflected sky. You touch it lightly with the pad of your thumb, not pressing, just feeling for the slight catch that indicates a good bite. The metal is cool and dry, and it pulls at your skin with a faint, clean resistance. Satisfied, you lower the knife and turn your body toward the hide, shifting your weight from your right hip to your left so that you can lean forward without strain. The piece you will cut first is the pommel cover, the curved strip that will wrap around the front arch of the saddle tree. It is not the largest piece, but it is one of the most important, and starting with a smaller cut allows you to settle into the rhythm of the blade before tackling the long lines of the seat and the side panels. You locate the charcoal outline of the pommel cover near the top edge of the hide, a shallow arc drawn with a single smooth stroke, its ends tapering slightly. With your free hand, you smooth the leather around the marked area, pressing out any small ripples, and then you place 2 fingers just inside the line to tension the surface. The first cut is always a moment of commitment. The blade tip meets the leather at the very start of the charcoal line, and you press down with a steady, even force. The leather resists for a heartbeat, then the tip sinks through, and you hear the soft pop as it breaks the grain. You begin to draw the blade toward you, along the marked curve, not rushing, letting the sharpness do the work. The sound that rises from the cut is a low, drawn-out whisper, almost a hiss, as the edge parts the fibers of the hide. It is a sound that exists only at close range, meant for your ears alone. The blade moves at the pace of a slow breath, and behind it, the leather opens like a quiet mouth, revealing the paler, suited underside that has never before seen the sun. The line you follow is true to the charcoal, and when you reach the end of the first curve, you pause, lifting the blade just enough to reposition your hand without removing it entirely, and then continue around the second curve until the piece falls free with a soft flop onto the grass. A small off-cut of leather, shaped like a crescent moon, lies beside the main hide, its edges raw and pale. You pick up the piece and examine it briefly, turning it over in your hand. The suede side is soft and fibrous, a pale tan that contrasts sharply with the darker smooth grain of the top. You run your thumb along the cut edge, feeling for any unevenness. It is clean, a single continuous plane, with no ragged fibers or wavering. Satisfied, you set the pommel cover aside on a clean patch of grass to your right, where it will begin its own small pile of freed pieces. Then you turn back to the main hide and locate the cantle cover, a similar curved strip near the opposite end. You shift your body around the hide so that you are facing this new mark squarely, your knees pressing into the cool grass. The cutting motion begins again, the blade tip placed at the start of the line, the steady pressure, the low whisper as the leather parts. The sound is hypnotic once you settle into it, a continuous soft shush that seems to pull your breathing into synchronization. You watch the gap widen behind the knife, the dark grain separating from itself, and you feel the slight drag of the leather against the sides of the blade, a tactile feedback that tells you the blade is neither too dull nor too sharp, but exactly right. When the cantle cover drops onto the grass, you place it with the pommel cover and take a moment to flex your fingers. The knife handle has left a faint impression on your palm, a series of light ridges from the leather wrapping, and you rub your thumb across them. The sun is now directly overhead, or nearly so, and the heat has intensified. You can feel it on the crown of your head and the tops of your shoulders, a warm weight that is not unpleasant but reminds you of the long afternoon ahead. A bead of sweat rolls down your temple, and you wipe it away with the back of your knife hand, being careful to keep the blade angled safely away from your face. You take a slow breath, glance at the blue-white sky where a few wispy clouds have begun to form, and then return your attention to the leather. The next pieces are the side panels, the long skirts that require long, straight cuts. You move your body along the edge of the hide to the first panel outline, a tall rectangle with softly rounded corners. The top edge follows the charcoal line you drew along the spine area, and the bottom edge extends toward the belly of the hide. This will be a cut measured in arm lengths, not finger lengths, and it will require you to maintain a consistent angle and pressure over a much longer stroke. You begin at the top right corner, sinking the blade tip in, and then draw the knife downward towards you along the straight edge. The whisper continues, steady and low, as your hand travels from high to low, the blade moving through the leather with a smoothness that comes only from practice. Halfway down, you pause to adjust your grip, not because you are tired, but because the angle of your wrist has changed and you want to keep the blade perfectly vertical. You release your hold for a second, regrip, and continue. The cut line is ruler straight, the charcoal mark disappearing exactly into the gap as the two sides fall away from each other. At the bottom you turn the knife and cut along the short lower edge, then back up the other long side, the blade's whisper changing in pitch very slightly as the leather thickness varies. When you complete the fourth side, the entire side panel loosens and you lift it away with both hands, laying it flat on the grass beside the arch pieces. The second side panel is a mirror of the first, and you cut it in the same manner, working your way around the rectangular outline with the same patient pace. The repetition of the motion is calming. There is no need to think about what comes next, because your hands already know. Your mind drifts slightly as you cut, not to anything specific, but to a kind of quiet awareness where the only things that exist are the blade, the leather, the sound, and the feeling of the sun on your back. The second panel joins the first on the growing pile of cut pieces, and you straighten your spine, pressing your knuckles into the small of your back to release a gentle ache. The largest piece, the saddle seat itself, still waits within the hide, outlined by its long curves. This cut will be the most demanding, not because the leather is thicker it is, but only slightly, but because the lines are long and sweeping, and a mistake on a curve can weaken the final saddle. You shift around the hide until you're positioned at the front edge of the seat outline, near the pommel curve, and you lower the knife to the charcoal line. The first incision enters the leather with that same soft pop, and you draw the blade along the curve, your wrist rotating slowly to follow the arc. The cut is a single flowing motion from the front point, around the wide pommel arch, and down the straight side toward the cantle. You breathe out as you cut, and your breath is steady, coming from low in your belly. The knife traces the full side length, and you stop at the cantle curve, resetting your body position before tackling the tighter turn. The cantle curve is sharper, requiring you to make smaller, more controlled cuts rather than one long sweep. You advance the blade inch by inch, watching the charcoal line disappear into the cut until the back end of the seat is fully free. Then you start up the opposite side, cutting toward the pommel once more, feeling the pleasant burn of concentration in your forearms. The hide shifts slightly under the pressure, and you pause to reposition one of the stone weights that has loosened, pressing it back down before continuing. Finally, the blade reaches the start point, the circle completes, and the large seat piece falls loose from the hide, settling with a soft weight onto the grass. You lift it with both hands and hold it up against the sky, the light shining through the leather at the edges where the cut is fresh. The shape is elegant and functional, a perfect match for the saddle tree that waits on the tool mat. You place the seat piece on top of the side panels and then sit back, taking a long, slow breath. The main hide is now reduced significantly, with large empty spaces where the cut pieces have been removed. The remaining leather looking like a puzzle with several pieces already placed. You gather the offcuts, the irregular scraps that will not be used for the main components, but that are too substantial to discard. These you collect one by one, a long thin strip from between the seat and the first panel, a curved remnant from beside the cantle cover, several small triangles and quadrilaterals from the hide's uneven edges. Each offcut you smooth flat with your hand, running your palm from one end to the other to press out any curling, and then you stack them in a neat pile separate from the main pieces. These scraps will later become the narrow straps that reinforce the girth loops, the small guards that protect the stirrup buckles, and perhaps a few decorative fringes if the owner of the saddle requests them. Even the smallest piece has a potential use, and you treat them with the same care as the large panels. With all the main pieces now free, you reach for the bone folder. This tool lies on the mat where you left it, a flat length of polished rib bone from a cow, pale ivory in color with a slight natural curve. The surface is incredibly smooth, almost slick from decades of burnishing leather, and the edges are rounded so they will not cut or scratch. You pick it up and feel its cool weight, heavier than the knife but more balanced, a tool made for pressure rather than precision. You begin with the seat piece, laying it flat on the grass in front of you, grain side up. The cut edges are clean, but the leather itself has a slight waviness from being rolled and unrolled, a memory of its stored shape that must be smoothed out. You press the flat side of the bone folder against the grain near the center of the seat and push outward toward the edge, using firm, even pressure. The tool glides over the leather with a soft, scratchless friction, and the fibers beneath it flatten and align. You work methodically from the center out to each edge, overlapping each stroke slightly, like a farmer plowing a field, covering every inch of the surface. The leather responds by laying perfectly flat, its natural grain becoming more uniform and even, the small imperfections and wrinkles disappearing under the bone's patient persuasion. You turn the piece over and do the same to the suede side, though more gently, as the softer surface does not need as much pressure. You repeat this smoothing process for each piece, the two side panels, the pommel cover, the cantle cover, all receiving the same unhurried attention. The motion is rhythmic, a slow push-turn-lift sequence that seems to match the pulse in your wrists. The sound of the bone folder moving over leather is barely audible, just a faint brushing, like a hand being drawn across a smooth wooden table. As you work, the sun begins its slow downward tilt from the zenith, and the heat of the day softens by a degree. The pile of smoothed pieces grows, and you stack them now with the largest on the bottom, the smaller on top, creating a neat tower of leather that represents the skeleton of the saddle to come. The seat forms the base, the side panels next, then the arch covers, and finally the thin strap offcuts on the very top, held down by a small stone to keep the breeze from scattering them. You sit back and look at the stack for a moment, then let your gaze wander out across the steppe. The land is vast and quiet, the grass moving in long synchronized waves as the wind passes over it. Far out, perhaps a mile or more distant, you see a rider. The figure is small, a dark speck against the golden-green grass, moving slowly from left to right across your field of vision. The rider's horse walks at a steady pace, and you can see the occasional bob of its head as it navigates some small unevenness in the ground. The rider does not wave, does not signal. They are simply traveling as people do on the steppe, going from one camp to another or checking on a distant herd. You watch their progress for a long moment, tracking them against the horizon until they dip into a shallow fold in the land and disappear. The grass where they were is now empty, as if they had never passed. The sight of another human being, even at such a distance, reminds you of the larger world beyond your workspace. But it is not a distracting thought. It is simply part of the tapestry of the day, like the clouds and the birds and the whisper of the wind. You turn back to your stack of leather pieces, and your hands, which had rested idle on your knees, now reach for the bone folder again. There is still the matter of the edges. Each cut edge, though straight and clean, is slightly sharp and raw, and over time these edges will need to be softened and polished. You pick up the pommel cover from the top of the stack and hold it edge up, then begin to run the rounded side of the bone folder along the cut surface, rubbing back and forth with a gentle pressure. The friction burnishes the fibers, darkening them slightly and smoothing them into a soft, rounded finish. You work your way around the entire perimeter of the small piece, then set it down and pick up the cantle cover, doing the same. The process is slow and entirely absorbing, your attention narrowed to the thin strip of leather edge passing under your fingers. By the time you have burnished the edges of all the pieces, the afternoon has advanced noticeably, the shadows of the stones on the grass now longer and more angled. You gather all the pieces and the offcuts and carry them in your arms to the workspace beside the chair, laying them out on the tool mat next to the wooden saddle tree. The frame and the lever, now side by side, look like two parts of a whole that is beginning to recognize itself. You align the seat piece over the tree just to see how they correspond, not tacking anything down yet, just resting the leather over the wooden arches. The fit is good, the curves matching with only a small allowance for the stretching that will come later. You remove the seat and set it back on the pile, then look at the sky once more. The blue has deepened, the clouds have thickened slightly, and the light holds a faint golden quality that signals the afternoon's slow turn toward evening. There is still much to do, but for now the cutting is complete, the leather is free from the hide, and the work has gone well. You pour yourself a cup of cool water from the flask, drink it slowly, and then sit down beside your tools, resting in the quiet satisfaction of a day's steady progress. The afternoon has settled into a steady warmth, the sun now sliding down the western arc, but still strong enough to raise a shimmer of heat from the grass. You have rested enough, the water from the flask still cool in your throat, and the leather pieces lie on the tool mat beside the wooden saddle tree, their edges burnished and smooth, waiting for the thread that will bind them. You rise from your seated rest and walk the few paces back to the djur, ducking inside to retrieve the spool of sinew that you soaked earlier in the morning. It sits in a small clay bowl of water, the liquid now slightly cloudy, and when you lift the sinew out, it gleams wet and translucent, like a strand of pale honey. The water drips from it onto the earthen floor, making tiny dark spots that vanish quickly into the dust. You carry the sinew carefully out into the sunlight, where it shines with a soft luster, and you drape it over a clean patch of grass to drain while you prepare the other tools. From the tool mat you take up the curved needles, selecting the one with the medium-sized eye, neither the largest nor the smallest, and you test its point against your fingertip. It is sharp, able to pierce leather if driven by the awl's guiding hole. You place it beside the sinew and then fetch the block of beeswax, that dull yellow lump in its small clay dish. The wax has softened in the day's heat, its surface slightly tacky to the touch. You pull a length of the damp sinew free from the spool, about 2 arm lengths, and you lay it across your knee. Taking the wax block in your other hand, you press the sinew against it and draw the thread through, pulling it from end to end, so that a thin coating of wax adheres to every fiber. The wax darkens the sinew from translucent white to a soft amber, and the scent of honey rises briefly into the air. You repeat the motion, running the sinew back through the wax a second time, then a third, until the thread feels smooth and slightly tacky between your fingers, neither too dry nor too sticky. Now you thread the needle, passing the sinew through the elongated eye with a single deft motion, and you pull it through until the needle sits at the midpoint of the strand. You do not tie a knot. The saddle stitch you will use requires both ends to be free. With the needle threaded and the sinew prepared, you gather the 2 leather pieces that will form the seat. The top piece, the one you cut from the thick spine area, is already smooth and flat. The under panel is a thinner piece that you retrieved from the storage chest, while inside a soft, pliable leather taken from a younger horse, its grain finer and its color a shade lighter. This under panel will sit against the horse's back, providing a cushion and absorbing sweat, and it needs to be supple enough to mold to the animal's shape over time. You carry both pieces to your workspace and lower yourself to the ground, folding your legs beneath you, and you lay the top piece across your lap, grain side up, then place the under panel on top of it, aligning the edges. The 2 layers form a sandwich, the thicker top providing structure and the softer under panel providing comfort. And as you hold them together you feel the slight springiness of the double thickness. You shift them until the cut edges match perfectly, and then you hold them pressed between your knees, clamping the layers steady so that neither can slide. Before the needle can pass, there must be holes. You reach for the awl, the iron rod set into its smooth wooden handle, and you bring its sharp point to the leather at the edge of the seat near the pommel curve. You choose a spot about a finger's width thin from the cut edge, a margin that will allow the leather to be stretched over the saddle tree later without tearing. The awl's point dimples the grain, and you press down, rotating your wrist slightly to push the point through both layers. The leather resists with a familiar dense grip, and then the awl breaks through the underside with a soft percussive thump as it strikes the block of soft wood you keep on your lap beneath the leather to protect your legs. The hole is clean and round, a tiny dark eye that immediately begins to close as the elastic leather tries to heal itself. You withdraw the awl and insert the curved needle into the hole from the top, pushing it down through both layers until the tip emerges from the underside, and you catch the tip with your fingers and pull the needle free, drawing the waxed sinew through the hole until only a short tail remains above the surface. This tail you hold down with your thumb, pressing it flat against the grain, so that it will be trapped by the next stitch. You pick up the awl again and pierce a second hole, a short distance from the first, the spacing measured not with a rule, but by the width of your thumbnail. The awl sinks, the thump sounds, and you withdraw the iron and set it aside. Now you take the needle and insert it into this second hole, again from the top, pushing it through and pulling the sinew until it is taut but not tight, leaving a tiny loop of slack that you will adjust with the next motion. The saddle stitch is a simple, ancient pattern. Each time you pass the needle down through a new hole, you also pass it back up through the previous hole from the underside, creating a lock that will hold even if one thread breaks. You bring the needle up through the first hole now, piercing upward from the underside, and the sinew slides through, filling the hole and crossing the tail that you have held in place. With both ends now on the top side, you grasp them gently, one in each hand, and pull them apart with a slow, steady tension. The sinew creaks faintly as it tightens, the wax catching in the leather, and the stitch sinks into the surface, drawing the two layers together so closely that the seam becomes a single flat edge. You repeat the process, moving from right to left along the edge, a direction you chose arbitrarily years ago and have never changed. The awl pierces the next hole. Thump, withdraw. The needle goes down. The sinew follows. Your left hand catches the tip and pulls. Then the needle comes back up through the previous hole. The sinew crosses, and your hands pull the stitch tight with that same even pressure. The rhythm of it settles over you like a familiar song. All down, pull, up, cross, pull. The leather whispers with each pass of the sinew, a soft hissing sound that seems to come from the material itself, and the stitches accumulate in a neat row, each one a tiny slanting dash against the brown grain. You notice the way the light catches the waxed sinew, making each stitch gleam for a moment before it settles into the leather. You notice the gentle ache that begins to build in the base of your thumb from the repeated pulling, a sensation that is not pain but simply the body registering sustained effort. You flex your thumb, roll your wrist, and continue. After a span of time measured only in stitches, you reach the curve of the cantle where the edge turns more sharply. Here you must slow down, reducing the spacing between holes so that the stitches can follow the tighter radius without puckering. The awl pierces more frequently, the thumbs coming closer together, and the needle moves in shorter arcs. The leather resists slightly more on the curve, the fibers compressed by the tighter bend, and you apply a little more pressure to the awl while keeping the tool perfectly straight. The holes are still clean, still round, and the sinew still pulls through with that same waxed smoothness. You round the curve and find yourself moving now from the left side of the seat toward the pommel along the opposite edge, the stitches growing behind you like a road you have already traveled. You pause once to re-wax a section of sinew that has begun to feel dry, running it across the block of beeswax 3 more times and then threading it back through the needle. The interruption is brief, and soon the rhythm resumes, the awl and needle moving in their patient dance. The sun, which had been a warm weight on your shoulders, has shifted, and you feel its rays now on your left arm and the side of your neck. A small shadow moves across the leather as a bird passes overhead, silent and swift, and you do not look up to see it. The only world that matters right now is the line of stitching, the texture of the leather under your fingers, the smell of wax and damp sinew and warm hide. The stitch count grows and the seat becomes more solid, the 2 layers now bound together so tightly that they will never separate, not even under years of hard riding. The seam you are creating is not merely functional, it is the spine of the saddle, the thing that will hold all the other pieces in their proper tension. You think of this only in the abstract, as a quiet understanding rather than a conscious thought, and your hands continue their work while your mind floats in a calm, untethered space. A breeze passes, cooler now as the afternoon begins its slow turn toward evening, and it lifts the edge of the under panel that hangs loose beyond your knees. You press it back down with your elbow, and then shift your position slightly, straightening your back and rolling your shoulders to release a stiffness that has crept into your upper spine. The pause is short, and then you lean forward again, the awl finding its mark, the needle following. You work your way up the straight side toward the pommel. The stitch is now a long, unbroken line that maps the contour of the seat. The leather has become warm in your hands, heated by your body and the sun, and it has begun to give off a richer scent, deeper and more animal, as if the stitching has awakened something sleeping within the hide. You inhale that scent without remarking on it, letting it become simply another part of the work. When you reach the pommel curve, you slow again, the awl making those shorter, more frequent punches, the sinew drawing tight around the tighter arc. This curve is steeper than the cantle, and it requires a higher concentration. Your gaze narrows, your breathing becomes shallower, and the world outside the circle of your lap recedes to a blur of green and gold. You complete the curve, then travel a short distance down the final straight to meet the place where you began, and when the last stitch is pulled and the sinew holds firm, you sit back with a long exhale. The seam is complete, a continuous line of waxed stitches that runs around the entire perimeter of the seat, binding the top and under panel into a single unified piece. You snip the remaining sinew close to the leather with your small knife, leaving a tiny tail that you tuck into the last hole with the point of the awl so that it will not fray or catch. The seat piece now lies in your lap, transformed. It is no longer just a cut shape, but a structural object, dense and firm and ready to be shaped over the wooden frame. You lift the stitched seat and turn it over in your hands, examining the underside where the under panel shows its lighter color. The stitches are visible here too, a mirror image of the top side, and you run your thumb along them to feel their evenness. There are no loose loops, no gaps, no places where the leather has bunched or folded. The work is good. You set the seat aside on the grass, placing it gently on the stack of smooth pieces, and then you stretch your arms above your head, feeling the pull in your shoulders and the satisfying release. The day has moved on, the shadows of the stones have lengthened considerably, and the sky has taken on a pale golden tint near the horizon. The air holds a slight coolness now, a hint of the evening that will arrive in another hour or two. You pour yourself another cup of water, this time from the kettle that has been sitting off the fire. The water now tepid rather than cold, and you drink it slowly while looking out across the steppe. The flock of sheep is barely visible now, a thin pale line on a distant rise, and the herder's pony is moving them slowly toward the camp for the night. The hawk that circled earlier has gone, replaced by a pair of smaller birds that dart and swoop low over the grass, catching the insects that rise in the cooling air. You finish the water and set the cup aside, then gather your stitching tools. The awl goes back on the mat. The needle is wiped clean of wax and laid flat. The remaining sinew is coiled and placed in the shade so it will not dry out. You notice a small scrap of leather that has been sitting unused near your knee, a bit left over from trimming the under panel, and you pick it up and turn it over in your fingers. It is too small for any practical use, barely the size of your palm, but the grain is fine and the color is a pleasing light fawn. You tuck it into the pile of offcuts anyway, not because you have a plan for it, but because the habit of saving everything is too deeply ingrained to ignore. The small act of tidying completes the stitching phase, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of one more task finished. The saddle seat, the heart of the project, is complete, and tomorrow you will begin the work of shaping it over the wooden frame. But tomorrow is a long way off, and the evening is approaching, and there is no reason to think about what comes next. For now, you simply sit beside your tools, watching the sky deepen, listening to the wind that never stops, feeling the good tiredness in your hands. The stitched seat piece rests on the grass beside your knee, still holding the warmth of your hands from the long hours of stitching. Its edges are neat now, the waxed sinew gleaming faintly in the golden afternoon light, and the 2 layers of leather have become one solid panel that will soon take the shape of a horse's back. But before the leather can be shaped, there is the wooden frame to attend to, the saddle tree that has been waiting silently on the tool mat since yesterday. You rise from your cross-legged seat, feeling the pleasant stretch in your hips and knees, and you walk over to where the birchwood frame lies. It rests on the worn leather mat, pale and clean, its simple curves catching the sunlight. You pick it up with both hands, one on each sidebar, and lift it to your eye level. The saddle tree is a humble thing, made from a single birch tree that grew somewhere far to the north, where the steppe gives way to scattered forests. The woodworker who shaped it, a man you have known for many years, lives in that northern region and trades his frames for leather goods, an exchange that has worked well for both families across the seasons. He carved this particular tree during the winter months, when the birch sap was low and the wood was dense and stable, and by the time it reached your hands it had been aged for half a year in a dry, shaded place. The wood is a pale cream color, almost white in the brightest sun, with a fine straight grain that runs along the length of each bar. There are no knots, no cracks, no dark spots of weakness. You know without testing that this frame will bear weight without complaint for decades. The 2 side bars which will lie along the horse's spine on either side of the backbone are about the length of your arm from elbow to fingertips, and they are shaped with a subtle concave curve on their undersides to match the contour of a horse's ribs. The pommel arch rises at the front like the neck of a swan, a smooth curve of wood that will hold the front of the seat and provide a place for the rider's hand when mounting. At the back, the cantle arch is slightly lower and broader, its curve gentler, meant to cup the rider's lower back without restricting movement. The 2 arches are joined to the sidebars with tight mortise and tenon joints, secured with glue boiled from fish bladders, and the joints are so clean that you can barely see the seam where the pieces meet. You run your thumb over one of these joints, feeling the perfect smoothness, and you nod once, a small gesture of respect toward the distant woodworker. You carry the frame back to your sitting place and lower yourself to the ground once more, settling the tree across your lap with the pommel facing away from you and the cantle against your stomach. The wood is light, lighter than you would expect for its strength, and it has a dry, clean scent that reminds you of the northern forests where the birch grows. That scent is entirely different from the rich animal smell of the leather. It is sharp and astringent, almost like the smell of cold air on a winter morning, and it clears your nostrils of the wax and hide that have filled them for the past hour. You hold the frame at arm's length and close one eye, sighting along the right side bar to check its straightness. The line is true, with no warping or twist, and you repeat the sighting on the left side with the same result. Then you turn the frame over and examine the underside, where the bars will rest against the horse's back, and you run your fingers slowly along the entire length of each bar, feeling for any rough patches that might wear through the leather over years of riding. Your fingers find a small irregularity on the right bar near the midpoints where the rider's weight will press down most heavily. It is not a crack or a splinter, just a slight ridge of raised grain, perhaps where the woodworker's plane lifted a fibre instead of cutting it cleanly. It is barely visible, but your fingertip catches on it, a tiny disruption in the otherwise silky surface. You set the frame down carefully on the grass and lean to the side, reaching for the small piece of coarse gritstone that you keep among your tools. The stone is a dark grey rectangle, rough on one side and smoother on the other, and it fits into the palm of your hand as comfortably as a river pebble. You pick up the frame again and turn it so the rough spot faces upward. Then you bring the gritstone to the wood. You rub gently, using short strokes that follow the direction of the grain, and the stone makes a soft shushing sound as it abrades the raised fibers. A fine dust of birchwood falls onto your lap, pale as flour, and it carries that same clean northern scent even more strongly now. You pause after a few strokes and feel the spot again with your thumb. The ridge is diminished, but still present. You resume rubbing, applying only the lightest pressure, letting the stone do the work, and gradually the irregularity disappears into the smooth plane of the surrounding wood. You blow on the spot to clear the dust, and the wood is now perfectly even, ready to receive the leather without causing any hidden wear. Satisfied with the repair, you set the gritstone aside and wipe the wood dust from your lap with a sweep of your hand. The frame is ready, but before you can begin shaping the leather over it, you need to see how the two components relate to each other in their current dry state. This is a step of checking, of previewing, not of final assembly, and it will tell you where the leather needs to be stretched and where it will drape naturally. You lift the stitched seat piece from the grass and hold it above the frame, aligning the pommel curve of the leather with the pommel arch of the wood. Then you lower the leather, letting it settle over the frame, and you smooth it down with your palms, pressing it gently into the hollows and over the arches. The leather, still dry and unformed, does not conform to the frame easily. It tends over the curves, leaving air gaps underneath, and the side edges hang down past the sidebars with a generous overhang that will later be trimmed. You do not expect a perfect fit at this stage. The leather will be dampened and stretched later, and it will mold itself to the wood like a second skin. For now, you simply observe. You run your hand over the leather where it covers the pommel arch, feeling the way the material bridges from side to side without touching the wood beneath. This gap will disappear when the leather is wet and pliable, when you can pull it down and tack it into place, but for now it is a reminder of the work ahead. You shift your attention to the cantle, where the leather fits a little more snugly because the curve is less pronounced, and you notice that the side overhang is slightly uneven, longer on the left than on the right. You adjust the leather, sliding it a fraction to the right, and now the overhangs are more balanced. This is the kind of small correction that you make without thinking, your hands adjusting and readjusting until everything looks right to your eye. You smooth the leather again, pressing out a few wrinkles that are formed near the sidebars, and then you sit back and study the assembly from a distance. The saddle, even in this incomplete state, already looks like a saddle. The wooden frame gives it a solid geometry, and the leather gives it a surface, a skin, and the two materials together suggest the final object that will one day rest on a horse's back. You reach forward and press down on the seat with your open palm, testing the spring of the leather stretched loosely over the frame. It gives slightly under your pressure a soft, resilient bounce that will become firmer once the leather is tightened and tacked. You press again, a little harder, and you feel the wood bars beneath the leather resist your weight, transferring the force to the ground through your legs. The structure is sound. You lift your hand and let the leather return to its resting shape. You remove the seat from the frame, lifting it off carefully and setting it back on the grass. Then you pick up the frame alone and turn it in your hands once more, this time looking at it with the memory of the leather's fit fresh in your mind. There is a spot on the left side bar, near the cantle joint, where the leather seemed to lift away more than you expected, and you wonder if the wood there might need a slight adjustment. You run your thumb over the area and find that the surface is smooth, but that the angle of the bar might be a fraction too sharp. This is a subtle thing, the kind of detail that only matters to a maker who has spent years fitting leather to wood, and you decide to soften the angle slightly with the gritstone. You rub the edge gently, rounding it just a little, and the dust gathers on your thumb. When you blow it away and test the spot again, it feels better, the transition more gradual, and you know that the leather will lie flatter there when it is finally stretched. This small adjustment took only a few moments, but it is the kind of care that separates a saddle that will last from one that will fail. You set the frame down on the grass in front of you and rise to stretch your legs. Walking a slow circle around your workspace, you look out at the steppe that surrounds you on all sides. The sun has descended further, and its light is now a deep amber that paints the grass in shades of gold and copper. The long shadows of the afternoon have grown even longer, the shadow of the Djur stretching out to the east like a dark pool, and the air has cooled to a temperature that feels perfect against your skin. Far out on the plain you can see the flock of sheep more clearly now as they move closer to the camp, their wool catching the low light and glowing with a warm, creamy brightness. The herder boy is still on his pony, a small silhouette against the luminous grass, and you can hear the faint bleating of the sheep now, a sound that carries clearly in the cooling air. The clouds above, which had been thin and wispy for most of the day, have thickened into more substantial forms, and their undersides are tinted pink and orange by the setting sun. One cloud in particular draws your eye, a large flat-bottomed shape that moves slowly from west to east, its shadow gliding across the steppe like a great dark bird. You watch the shadow pass over a distant rise, dimming the grass for a moment, then releasing it back to brightness as the cloud continues its journey. There is a peacefulness in this watching, a sense of connection to the vast and patient rhythms of the land. You walk to the stream and crouch by the water, which is now dark and glassy in the evening light, the surface reflecting the pink sky and the shapes of the clouds. The water still flows with its constant soft music, and the pebbles on the bottom are visible as dark, rounded shapes. You dip your hands in and rinse them, washing away the wood dust and the faint residue of wax that has clung to your fingers. The water is colder now than it was this morning, chilled by the approaching evening, and it makes your fingers ache slightly as you hold them under the flow. You splash a little water on your face once more, and the cold tightens your skin and refreshes you, washing away the accumulated fatigue of the day's work. You dry your hands on the front of your felt coat and rise, looking back at the Djur where a thin wisp of smoke is now rising from the smoke hole. Someone has lit the evening fire inside, and the smell of that smoke, carried on the light breeze, reaches you as a promise of warmth and food to come. You return to your workspace and settle back onto the grass, crossing your legs and pulling the wooden frame onto your lap once more. The brief break has given your eyes a fresh perspective, and you look at the frame now with a renewed attention. There is a small detail you notice, something you might have overlooked earlier. The mortise and tenon joint at the left pommel has a tiny gap, a hairline crack where the glue may have shrunk slightly during the drying months. It is not a structural flaw, the joint is still tight and strong, but the gap could allow moisture to enter over time, potentially loosening the joint after many seasons of exposure to rain and horse sweat. You decide to fill it. From the tool mat you retrieve a small pot of glue made from boiled fish skins and kept sealed with a wooden stopper. The pot is small enough to fit in your palm, and when you pull the stopper, the smell that rises is strong and marine. A sharp tang of fish that seems out of place on the grassy steppe, but that you have come to associate with the work of assembly. You dip a thin sliver of wood into the glue and carefully work it into the hairline gap, pressing the adhesive deep into the crevice with slow, patient movements. The glue is thick and golden, and it fills the gap completely, sealing it against the future. You wipe away the excess with a scrap of leather and set the frame aside to let the glue dry, placing it in a position where it will not be disturbed by the breeze or by your movements. The repair is invisible, and you know that the joint will now hold for as long as the saddle exists. With the frame resting and the glue setting, you gather the leather seat piece and drape it over the frame one final time, not to check the fit, but simply to see the saddle as it will appear when finished. The leather settles over the wood, still loose and unformed, but now you can see the saddle's final proportions, the way the seat will curve under a rider, the way the pommel will rise at the front, the way the sidebars will support the weight. You run your hand over the seat, smoothing the grain, and you imagine the day when this saddle will be cinched onto a horse, when it will bear a rider across the steppe, when it will become part of someone's daily life. That day is still distant, but it is visible now, a quiet certainty waiting at the end of the work. You remove the leather and set it back on the pile of pieces, and you look at the wooden frame one more time. The glue has already begun to set, the golden liquid hardening to a clear, glassy finish. The frame is ready. The day is almost over. You lie back on the grass for a moment, looking up at the vast evening sky, letting the last warmth of the sun rest on your face, and you feel a deep, quiet contentment that has nothing to do with accomplishment, and everything to do with the simple rhythm of working and resting under the wide and patient sky. With the wooden frame now resting beside you, its small glue repair drying clear and hard in the late afternoon air, you turn your attention back to the pile of cut leather pieces. The seat, the side panels, the pommel cover, the cantle cover, all lie stacked on the grass near your knee, their raw edges pale and slightly fuzzy from the cut. The next task is to refine these edges, to transform them from the rough planes left by the knife into smooth, polished rims that will feel soft under a rider's hand and resist fraying for the life of the saddle. This is the work of beveling and burnishing, a slow, repetitive process that demands patience more than strength, and you settle into it with the same quiet acceptance that you bring to every other stage. You pick up the smallest of your knives, a short blade with a slightly curved belly, its handle wrapped in the same dark leather as the larger cutting knife, but worn even smoother because this tool is used so often. The blade is fine and thin, sharpened only on one side so that it can shave off the tiniest curls without gouging. You test its edge by drawing it lightly across a scrap of leather, and it peels away a hair-thin strip with almost no resistance. Satisfied, you set the knife down and select the first piece to work on, the pommel cover. It is a manageable size, a curved strip that fits comfortably in your left hand, and you hold it up with the cut edge facing outward, tilting it so the sunlight falls directly on the surface. The cut edge is a single flat plane, pale tan against the darker grain, and you can see the fine parallel lines left by the cutting stroke. Those lines are what you will erase. You take the knife in your right hand and position the blade at the start of the edge, holding it at a slight angle, about halfway between flat and perpendicular, a position you have learned through years of practice. The blade meets the corner where the grain surface transitions into the cut edge, and you press forward with a gentle, controlled push. A thin curl of leather lifts away from the edge, spiraling upward like a tiny wood shaving, pale on one side and dark on the other, and it falls into your lap with a whisper. The newly exposed surface beneath is a softer brown, and the sharp 90-degree corner has become a soft, sloping bevel that catches the light differently. You shift your grip slightly and continue along the length of the strip, the blade moving in short, incremental advances, each one peeling away another small curl. The sound is a faint, rhythmic scraping, barely louder than your own breathing, and it mingles with the distant calls of the sheep and the constant low rustle of the grass. As you work, the curls gather in the folds of your felt coat, a small pile of delicate brown spirals that look like the shed skin of some tiny animal. You do not brush them away. They will fall off when you stand, or the wind will take them, and there is no reason to interrupt the motion. You reach the end of the pommel cover's edge and turn the piece over, beveling the opposite side as well, so that both faces of the cut edge are softened. The knife continues its steady advance, and the leather gradually transforms from something raw and sharp into a finished edge that invites a finger to run along it. When both sides are done, you hold the piece up to the light and sight along the edge, checking for any spots you might have missed. One small section near the center still shows a hint of the original flat cut, and you touch it up with 2 short strokes of the blade, the curls falling away, and then it is perfect. You set the pommel cover aside on the grass to your right, where it joins the growing collection of refined pieces. Next you take up the cantle cover, a slightly larger and more deeply curved piece. The tighter curves present a different challenge, as the blade must follow a more winding path without skipping or digging in. You begin at one end and work your way around the arc, your wrist rotating slowly to keep the blade at a consistent angle relative to the edge. On the inside of the curve, where the leather forms a concavity, you switch to a shorter blade stroke, advancing only a fraction of an inch at a time, because the natural pull of the knife wants to straighten out the curve, and you must resist that pull with small corrections. The curls here are tighter, almost like tiny ringlets, and they fall onto your lap in a series of soft taps. The smell of fresh leather, a clean animal scent, intensifies as the knife exposes the inner fibers, and you breathe it in without comment, letting it become part of the atmosphere of your work. When the cantle cover is complete, both edges beveled smooth, you set it beside the pommel cover and reach for the first of the 2 side panels. The side panels are larger, requiring more time and more patience, and you adjust your sitting position to accommodate their size. You spread the first panel across your lap, letting the far end drape over your knee and hang down toward the grass, and you begin at the top corner. The edge is long and mostly straight, with rounded corners at either end, and the straight sections allow you to settle into a faster rhythm, the knife moving in longer, smoother strokes that peel away continuous curls as long as your finger. The sight of those long curls, unbroken and perfectly even, brings a small private satisfaction that you do not express outwardly, but feel as a quiet warmth in your chest. The corners, when you reach them, require the same careful incremental approach as the curves on the arch covers, and you slow down, letting the knife find its way around the radius with tiny, precise cuts. The work is absorbing in a way that leaves no room for wandering thoughts. Your attention narrows to the edge, the blade, the angle, the curl, and the world beyond recedes to a soft blur of green and gold. When the first side panel is done, you set it aside and pick up the second, repeating the entire process. The repetition is soothing rather than tedious, each stroke building on the last, and by the time the second panel is finished, the sun has moved a small distance across the sky and the pile of beveled pieces has grown to include every component. The leather edges are now all uniformly softened, each one a gentle slope rather than an abrupt corner, and the pieces look more refined, more intentional than they did when they came fresh from the cutting. You gather the leather curls from your lap, cupping them in your palm, and you toss them onto the grass, where they will dry and crumble and eventually blow away. Then you stretch your arms above your head, arching your back to release a stiffness that has settled between your shoulder blades from the prolonged hunched posture. Your spine cracks softly, a series of small pops, and you roll your head from side to side before lowering your hands and taking a deep breath. The next stage of smoothing requires moisture. You rise from the grass and walk to the stream, carrying with you a small strip of clean woolen cloth that you keep for this purpose. At the water's edge, you crouch and dip the cloth into the cold flow, letting it soak until it's heavy and dark with water. You wring it out partially, so that it remains damp but not dripping, and then you return to your workspace. The sun, which had been climbing all morning and early afternoon, is now at a point where your shadow is noticeably shorter than it was. A dark pool directly around your feet, and the heat has intensified. The grass is warm under your boots, and the air shimmers faintly above the hide that still lies spread on the ground, its remaining pieces waiting for their own turn. You settle back onto your sitting spot, folding your legs beneath you, and you place the damp cloth within easy reach. You pick up the pommel cover once more and hold it in your left hand, edge up. With the damp cloth in your right hand, you begin to rub the beveled edge, pressing the moisture into the leather with short, firm strokes. The water darkens the edge from pale tan to a deep brown, and the fibers swell slightly, becoming softer and more pliable. This moisture is essential for the burnishing that will follow. Dry leather can be polished to some degree, but damp leather yields a much smoother, glossier finish because the fibers compress and align rather than simply a braiding. You work your way around the entire edge of the pommel cover, re-wetting the cloth once when it begins to feel dry, and you watch the leather darken and soften under your touch. When the edge is uniformly damped, you set the piece aside on the grass and do the same for the cantle cover, the side panels, and finally the seat itself, which requires the most attention because its edge is the longest and will be the most visible on the finished saddle. The damp cloth glides over the leather, leaving a trail of dark moisture that gradually sinks in and disappears, and by the time you finish, all the edges have been moistened and are now ready for the bone folder. You retrieve the bone folder from the tool mat, that polished length of cow rib that fits so comfortably in your hand. Its surface gleams with the accumulated polish of years of use, and it is cool to the touch despite the warmth of the day. You take up the pommel cover once more, holding it steady with your left hand, and you bring the flat side of the bone folder against the damp edge. You press firmly and begin to rub, moving the tool back and forth along the edge with short, rapid strokes. The friction generates a slight warmth, barely perceptible, and the damp leather fibers respond by compressing into a smooth, dense surface. The sound is a soft, rhythmic shushing, like a hand rubbing across a smooth wooden board, and it fills your ears as you work. The edge darkens further under the friction, shifting from dark brown to a deeper, richer shade that approaches black, and a faint gloss begins to appear, a subtle shine that catches the sunlight. You rotate the piece slightly to reach a new section, and the bone folder continues its back and forth motion, your hand moving in a steady arc that has become second nature. As you work on the pommel cover, you fall into a state of calm focus, where the passing of time becomes difficult to measure. The only things that exist are the leather in your hand, the bone folder in your grip, the steady shush, shush, shush of the burnishing, and the slow transformation of the edge from rough to smooth. When the entire edge of the pommel cover gleams with a uniform dark polish, you set it aside and pick up the cantle cover, beginning the process again. The cantle cover's curves require a slight adjustment in the angle of the bone folder, tilting it to match the radius, but the motion is essentially the same, and your hand adapts without conscious direction. The burnishing of each piece is a small, self-contained world, and you move through those worlds one by one, unhurried, unbothered. After the arch covers come the side panels, their long straight edges offering a different kind of satisfaction. You can work in longer strokes here, the bone folder traveling from one end to the other in a single smooth glide before reversing direction. The sound changes slightly on the longer pieces, a deeper, more resonant shush, and the gloss builds more gradually, because the surface area is larger. You burnish the outer edges first, then the inner edges, turning the panel over to reach the underside. Your hand begins to feel a gentle warmth from the friction, and you pause once to flex your fingers and shake out a slight numbness that has crept into your palm. The break is brief, and then you continue, the bone folder picking up exactly where it left off, the rhythm reasserting itself. The seat piece, the largest of all, comes last. You drape it over your lap, letting the weight of the leather press down on your thighs, and you begin burnishing at the pommel curve, working your way down one side around the cantle and back up the other. The edges line, and the work takes a considerable stretch of time, but you do not measure it in minutes. You measure it in the gradual accumulation of gloss, in the way the edge darkens and hardens under your patient rubbing, in the quiet satisfaction of seeing the leather become something finer than it was before. By the time you finish, your arms feel tired in a pleasant, well-used way, and the seat edge gleams with a dark, polished finish that looks almost like carved wood rather than soft hide. You set the bone folder down on the grass and examine your hands, which are now slightly shiny themselves from the transferred wax and oil of the leather, and you rub them together, feeling the smoothness. You rise to your feet and walk a slow circle around your workspace, your legs grateful for the movement. The stream glitters in the sunlight, and as you pass near its bank, you notice a cluster of wild flowers growing in the damp soil at the water's edge. They are small things, white and pale purple, their petals delicate and papery, and they nod in the breeze as if acknowledging your presence. You pause and look at them for a moment, their simple beauty a quiet contrast to the brown and green world of your work. A bee moves among the flowers, its body heavy with pollen, its buzz a low, contented hum that rises and falls as it visits each bloom. You watch the bee for a while, then turn and walk back to your sitting spot. The leather pieces lie on the grass where you left them, their edges now dark and glossy, transformed by the work of your hands. You settle back onto the ground, pick up the bone folder, and double-check each piece, running the tool over any spot that seems slightly less polished than the rest. These touch-ups are quick, a few extra strokes here and there, and then you are truly finished. The pieces are ready, their edges smooth and strong, and the next stage of the saddle's creation can begin whenever you are ready. For now, you simply sit with the completed work, the bone folder resting in your lap, the wild flowers nodding in the distance, and the warm, steady sun continuing its slow path across the endless sky. The offcuts have waited patiently on the grass beside your knee, a small pile of irregular shapes that the larger pieces left behind. Now they will become the straps and the girth, the parts that bear the constant pull of a rider's weight and the steady pressure of a horse's movement. You gather the pile and sort through it with both hands, spreading the scraps across the grass so you can see each one clearly. The leather here varies in thickness and shape. Some pieces are long and narrow, trimmed from the edges of the side panels. Others are shorter and wider, remnants from between the seat and the skirts. A few are small triangles or odd quadrilaterals that seem too awkward for any purpose. Your fingers move through them gently, feeling for density and grain, and you set aside the thickest, strongest pieces for the stirrup straps. These must come from the same dense spine area that gave you the seat, because they will hold the rider's full weight when mounting and dismounting, and they must not stretch or tear under that load. The pieces you choose are about the width of your 3 fingers and roughly twice the length of your forearm, and you lay them side by side on the grass, 2 for the left stirrup and 2 for the right, since each strap will be doubled over for strength. The remaining offcuts you sort into a second pile, selecting the longer, more flexible strips for the girth. The girth is a different kind of component. It must be strong, but also slightly yielding, able to conform to the barrel of a horse without pinching or restricting breath. For this, you choose strips from the belly area of the original hide, where the leather is naturally softer and has a slight stretch that will settle into the horse's shape over time. These strips are longer than the others, some nearly the length of your arm, and you straighten them out on the grass, smoothing their surfaces with your palm. They are not as thick as the stirrup strap pieces, which is as it should be, and their grain is finer, almost silky under your fingers. You gather 6 of the best strips for the girth braid, setting them aside in a neat row, and then you return the remaining scraps to the general pile, where they will wait for some future use you have not yet imagined. The stirrup straps need to be doubled, as a single thickness of even the strongest leather will eventually stretch under sustained tension. You take the first strap piece, a long rectangle of dense brown hide, and you fold it in half along its length, pressing the fold flat with your palm. The leather resists slightly, being thick and stiff, but it holds the crease when you run the bone folder along it. You align the 2 cut edges so they meet perfectly, And now you have a double layer strap that is half the width of the original piece but twice the thickness. You hold it between your knees, clamping the layers together as you did with the seat, and you reach for the awl and the needle threaded with waxed sinew. The stitching here will be simpler than the seat seam. You need only a straight line down each long edge to bind the two layers into a single unyielding strap. The awl sinks through the first hole near the end, penetrating both layers with a familiar thump against the wooden block on your lap, and the needle follows, drawing the sinew through. You work in the same saddle stitch you used on the seat, but the spacing is wider, the stitch is longer, because the strap does not need the same fine finish. It needs only to hold. The awl and needle move in their steady rhythm, and the waxed sinew gleams against the darker leather as it tightens. When you reach the far end of the first edge, you turn the strap and stitch back down the opposite side, completing the seam. The strap is now a solid, double-layered band, its stitched edges crisp and uniform, and you set it aside on the grass and pick up the second piece. The work of stitching the stirrup straps takes a long stretch of the late afternoon, but the rhythm is so steady and the motions so familiar that you fall into a quiet trance, your hands moving while your mind rests in a calm, unoccupied space. The sun has slipped further toward the horizon, and its light now comes at a slant that throws long shadows across the grass, the shadow of your own head and shoulders stretching out to the east like a dark companion. You complete the second strap, then the third and fourth, until 4 identical double-layer strips lie on the grass before you, their sinew stitches catching the golden light. You flex your fingers and rub the stiffness from your wrists, then pick up each strap and examine it for any unevenness. The stitching is true on all 4, the layers tight and flush, and you nod once to yourself before moving on. Now the straps need holes for the buckles, and for this you require a different set of tools. From the leather mat you retrieve the round punch, a short iron cylinder with a sharp circular edge, and the small wooden mallet whose head has been worn into a smooth dome by years of striking. You also fetch the iron buckles from a small leather pouch stored in the jur. The buckles are simple and functional, forged by a smith who visits the camp twice a year. Their surface is dark with a fine patina of forged scale and age. They are cool to the touch, heavier than they look, and their tongues are straight and true, able to hold a strap at any tension. You lay out 4 buckles on the grass, 1 for each stirrup strap, and then you take the first strap and position it across the wooden block on your lap. The holes must be placed carefully, because a strap that is too tight will be difficult to adjust, and a strap that is too loose will slip. You measure the distance from the buckle end by eye, using the width of your thumb as a guide, and you mark the spot with a tiny charcoal dot. Then you position the round punch over the mark, holding it perpendicular to the leather, and you raise the mallet. The first strike is light, just a tap to set the punch into the grain so it will not skid. Then you strike again, harder, and the punch drives through both layers of leather with a soft, percussive thud. The sound is different from the awl's sharp thump. It is deeper, more resonant, like a single beat on a small drum, and it carries briefly across the grass before fading into the wind. You lift the punch, and a small circle of cut leather falls from the hole, a perfect dark confetti that drifts down onto the grass. The hole is clean and round, its inner edge showing the pale swede of the leather's core. You move the strap and punch a second hole a short distance away, then a third, each one marked by that same soft thud of mallet on iron. 3 holes will allow the rider to adjust the stirrup length to different horses or riding styles, and you space them evenly, checking the distances with a glance rather than a measure. You repeat the punching for all 4 straps, the mallet rising and falling in a slow, steady cadence, the thuds punctuating the quiet air like a lazy heartbeat. When the last hole is punched, you gather the iron buckles and begin threading them onto the straps. The tongue of each buckle slides through the first hole, and then you fold the strap end back over the buckle bar and secure it with the remaining holes. The metal of the buckles is cool against your fingers, a contrast to the warm leather, and it clicks softly as the tongue settles into place. You pull on each strap, testing the hold, and the leather creaks faintly but holds firm, the doubled layers refusing to stretch. Satisfied, you set the stirrup straps aside in a neat row, their buckles gleaming dully in the low sunlight. Now comes the girth, which requires a different technique entirely. Instead of stitching, you will braid, using long strips of the softer belly leather to create a wide, flat band that will pass under the horse and hold the saddle steady. The braiding pattern is one you learned many years ago, passed down from your teacher who had learned it from his, a simple over-under weave that distributes tension evenly and creates a strap that is both strong and flexible. You gather the 6 strips you selected earlier and arrange them side by side on the grass, their ends aligned. Each strip is about the width of your thumb and nearly as long as your arm, and you have cut small slits near the ends so they can be joined together into a continuous length. You thread the end of one strip through the slit of another, pulling it tight so the joint lies flat, and you continue until all 6 strips are connected into one long, serpentine piece that coils on the grass like a sleeping snake. You anchor the top end of the braid by slipping it under your knee, pressing it firmly against the ground, and then you separate the strips into 3 pairs, each pair consisting of 2 strips lying flat against each other. The braid will be a 3-strand flat weave, the simplest and strongest pattern for a girth, and you begin by crossing the left pair over the center pair, then the right pair over the new center, working downward with slow, deliberate motions. The leather strips are supple from the belly area, and they bend easily under your fingers, their grain soft and slightly waxy to the touch. As you work, the braid grows beneath your hands, a flat band of interwoven leather that gradually extends across your lap and onto the grass in front of you. The pattern is rhythmic and soothing. Left over center, right over center, left over center, right over center, your fingers moving in a dance that requires no thought, only attention. The sound of the braiding is a soft, continuous rustling, the strips sliding over each other with a gentle whisper, and the braid tightens itself naturally as you pull each crossing snug. From time to time you pause to straighten the strips, untwisting any that have turned on their way through the weave, and then you continue, the pattern reasserting itself with the next crossing. The braid is now long enough to drape across both your knees and pool on the grass, and you estimate its length against the memory of a horse's girth circumference, adding a little extra for the buckles and the adjustment. When the braid reaches the length you need, you tie off the ends with a simple knot, leaving tails that can be trimmed later, and then you lift the completed girth with both hands. It is a wide, flat band, as broad as your 4 fingers held together, and it has a pleasing weight, substantial but not heavy. The weave is even and tight, the strips lying flat against each other without gaps, and when you pull on it with both hands, the braid holds firm, the tension distributing evenly through all the crossings. The girth is strong enough to bear the pull of a cinch without stretching or slipping, and it will soften further with use, molding itself to the contours of whatever horse it serves. You set the girth down beside the stirrup straps and take a moment to look at the collection. The 4 straps with their iron buckles, the long braided girth, the seat piece with its polished edges, the side panels, the arch covers, all lying together on the grass like a saddle that has been disassembled and laid out for inspection. The components have a harmony now, a sense that they belong together, and the saddle tree waiting on the tool mat will soon unite them into a single object. But before that final assembly, there is one more necessary step, a step that tests the work you have done and ensures that nothing will fail when the saddle is put to use. You must test each strap, each joint, each stitch, pulling and stressing the leather to confirm that it will hold. You begin with the stirrup straps, picking up the first one and bracing your foot against the looped end. You hold the buckle end in your hand and pull upward with a steady, increasing force, leaning your weight into the pull. The leather stretches only a tiny amount, a fraction of a finger's width, and then it stops, holding firm against your weight. The sinew stitches creak faintly but do not shift, and the iron buckle holds its position without slipping. You release the tension slowly and examine the strap. There is no tearing, no distortion of the holes, no sign that the leather has been overstressed. You repeat the test for each of the remaining 3 straps, and each one performs the same, holding steady under the load. The doubled layers have done their work, and the stitching has bound them into a single unyielding band. Next you test the girth, which requires a different approach. You slip one end of the braid under your foot and pull upward on the other end, then you twist and pull at an angle, simulating the sideways forces that a cinch might experience when a horse shifts its weight. The braid flexes easily, its soft belly leather allowing a slight give, but the weave holds tight and the knots at the ends do not loosen. You pull harder, then harder still, and the girth absorbs the force without complaint, the strips sliding against each other microscopically to distribute the tension. When you release the pull, the braid returns to its original length, showing no sign of permanent stretch. It is ready. With the testing complete, you gather all the components and arrange them on the grass beside the saddle tree. The tree sits at the center, its pale birch wood a contrast to the rich browns of the leather, and you lay the seat over it, the side panels beside it, the arch covers above it, the stirrup straps and girth below. The arrangement is orderly and pleasing, a diagram of the saddle to come, and you sit back on your heels and look at it for a long moment. The sun is now low on the horizon, its light a deep amber that washes over everything with a warm golden glow. The shadows are long and soft, and the air has cooled enough that you feel the first hint of evening on your cheeks. The sheep have moved closer to the camp, their bleating now loud and frequent, and you can hear the voices of others in the distance, the low murmur of conversation and the occasional laugh. The day's work is nearly done, and what remains will wait for tomorrow. You rise slowly, your body feeling the pleasant fatigue of a full day's labor, and you gather the tools from the mat. The awl goes into its leather sheath, the needles are wiped and stored, the mallet and punch are placed beside the bone folder, and the remaining sinew is coiled and set in the shade. The leather mat you roll up loosely, leaving it on the grass where it will be ready for the next day. You pick up the saddle tree and the leather components and carry them into the jar, laying them out on the chest where they will be safe from the dew and the night air. The interior of the ger is dim and warm, the evening fire crackling softly in the hearth, and the smell of cooking meat mixes with the familiar scents of wool and leather. You stand for a moment in the doorway, looking back out at the steppe where the last light is fading from the sky, and then you duck inside and let the felt flap fall closed behind you. The saddle will be finished tomorrow, but tonight there is only rest and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. The morning has passed, and the afternoon has begun its slow turn toward the cooler hours, but the sun still holds enough warmth to make the leather supple and receptive. Inside the ger, where the air is dim and still, you open the storage chest once more and reach past the remaining hides to find a small clay pot sealed with a wooden lid. The pot is cool and heavy in your hand, its sides unglazed and rough, and when you lift the lid, the smell that rises is rich and clean, rendered sheep fat mixed with a little beeswax, melted together months ago and left to cool into a soft, pale paste. The fat came from the tail of a fat-tailed sheep, a breed that stores its reserves in a broad, cushion-like tail, and the wax came from the wild bees that build their combs in the crevices of rocky outcrops to the south. Together they form a dressing that will sink into the leather, nourishing the fibers and sealing them against rain and snow and the sweat of horses. The paste is firm but not hard, like butter kept in a cool place, and when you press your fingertip into the surface, it yields easily, leaving a small dimple that slowly fills back in. You carry the pot outside into the sunlight, along with a clean woolen cloth that you will use to wipe your hands. The leather pieces lie on the grass where you left them, arranged in their orderly grouping. The seat, the side panels, the pommel cover, the cantle cover, the separate straps, the girth. They have rested through the midday hours, and their surfaces are dry and warm from the sun. The oiling will change them, darkening the color and bringing out the depth of the grain, and it will make them more resistant to the elements. You settle onto the grass beside the seat piece, folding your legs beneath you, and you place the clay pot on a flat patch of earth where it will not tip over. The woolen cloth goes beside it, already faintly stained with oil from previous uses. You begin with the seat, the largest and most important piece, lifting it onto your lap so that the grain side faces up. The leather is smooth under your palms, the edges burnished to a dark gloss, the stitching neat and even. You scoop a small amount of the paste onto the tips of your first 2 fingers, feeling its cool, greasy texture, and you touch it to the center of the seat. The paste sits on the surface for a moment, pale and opaque, and then you begin to work it in. You use small circular motions, your fingers pressing the paste into the leather with a steady, gentle pressure. The friction of your fingertips warms the fat, melting it slightly so that it spreads more easily, and the beeswax gives it a slight tackiness that helps it grip the grain. The circles you make are about the width of a coin, overlapping one another as you move outward from the center, and the paste slowly disappears into the leather, leaving behind a darkening trail that marks where you have worked. The color shifts from a warm chestnut to a deeper, richer brown, almost like the color of strong tea, and the grain becomes more visible, the tiny natural pores and wrinkles standing out with a new clarity. The motion of your hand is repetitive and soothing, a slow, constant circling that gradually covers the entire surface of the seat. You work your way to the front edge, near the pommel curve, and then back down the other side, ensuring that no spot is missed. The smell of the dressing fills the air around you, a warm, fatty scent that is both clean and slightly animal, mingling with the natural leather smell to create something that you find deeply familiar. When the grain side is fully oiled, you turn the seat over and repeat the process on the suede underside, which drinks the paste more quickly because the fibers are looser and more absorbent. The suede darkens to a shade closer to the grain side, and it feels softer under your fingers, more pliable, as if the leather has been awakened by the oil. You set the seat aside on the grass, now gleaming faintly with the absorbed dressing, and you pick up the first side panel. The process is the same. A small scoop of paste from the pot, the fingers pressing into the leather, the slow circular rubbing that spreads the fat and wax into every fiber. The side panels are long, and you work your way from one end to the other, your hand moving in a steady rhythm that seems to match the pace of your breathing. The sun warms your back and shoulders, and the light breeze passes now and then, cooling the sweat on your brow. You pause once to wipe your hands on the woolen cloth, removing the excess paste that has built up on your fingers, and then you scoop more from the pot and continue. The pile of oiled pieces grows on the grass to your right, the pommel cover, the cantle cover, each one receiving the same patient attention. The smaller pieces take less time, but you do not rush them. Each circle of your fingers is as careful as the last, each inch of leather receiving its due. The stirrup straps come next, their dense double layers requiring a little more paste because the thick leather seems to hunger for it. You work the dressing into the grain, then into the edges, then into the holes where the buckles will sit, ensuring that every exposed surface is protected. The iron buckles themselves you wipe with a cloth dipped in a tiny bit of paste, just enough to prevent rust, and the metal darkens slightly, losing its dull patina and taking on a subdued shine. The girth, with its braided strips, is the most intricate piece to oil. You cannot simply rub in circles because the weave would trap the paste in the crevices without spreading it evenly. Instead, you take a small amount of paste and rub it between your palms, warming it until it becomes almost liquid, and then you run your hands along the length of the braid, pressing the oil into the leather with a gentle squeezing motion. The strips absorb the dressing, becoming slightly darker and more flexible, and the whole girth takes on a unified, healthy sheen. You wipe your hands again on the cloth, which is now quite oily, and you set the girth with the other finished pieces. The sun has moved noticeably during the oiling, sliding down the western sky, so that its light now comes at a slant that throws long shadows across the grass. The heat of the day has softened, and the air has taken on that particular clarity that belongs to the late afternoon, when the dust seems to settle and the distant hills become sharper and more distinct. You rise from the grass, your knees cracking softly, and you walk to the stream to wash the remaining paste from your hands. The water is cold as it always is, and it feels good against your skin, rinsing away the greasy residue and leaving your fingers clean and slightly numb. You dry your hands on your coat and walk back to the workspace, where the oiled leather pieces now rest in the sun, the dressing slowly setting into the fibers. You know from long experience that the leather needs time to absorb the paste fully before the final assembly. If you rush this step, the dressing will sit on the surface and make the leather sticky, attracting dust and dirt. So you leave the pieces where they are, arranged on the grass in a neat row, and you step back to look at them. The color is now a uniform deep brown, a shade that speaks of age and strength, and the surfaces have a subtle matte sheen that is not shiny, but merely alive. The grain is more pronounced on each piece, the natural patterns of the hide standing out like the rings of a tree, and the stitching, which was pale waxed sinew, has absorbed some of the oil and turned a honey color that blends with the leather. The pieces look like parts of a single whole, and they are ready to be joined to the wooden frame. But before the assembly, there is another pot of tea to be made. The afternoon has grown long, and a quiet hunger has settled in your stomach, a reminder that the day has been full of work and that the body needs sustenance. You walk to the fire pit and add a few dry dung chips to the embers, blowing gently until a small flame rises, and then you hang the blackened kettle over the tripod. While the water heats, you go into the jar and retrieve a small bowl of dried curd, pale white lumps that crumble when you bite them, and a piece of flat bread cooked that morning on a hot stone. You sit beside the fire, breaking the bread into pieces and eating slowly, the curd sharp and salty on your tongue. The tea water begins to steam, and you prepare a cup with the same pressed leaves and a splash of milk. And then you sit back, cradling the warm cup in your hands and looking out across the steppe. The view from the fire pit is the same view you have seen every day of your life, but it never grows old. The grass stretches away in all directions, rippling in the breeze like the surface of a great lake, and the sky above is a pale, washed blue that deepens toward the horizon into a soft lavender. The herd of horses that belongs to your family is visible in the distance, a scatter of dark and light shapes moving slowly across a low rise, their heads down as they graze. The stallion stands apart, the tall black shape that watches over the mares and foals with a quiet vigilance. His tail swishes occasionally, a small motion that you can see even from this distance, and the sight of him brings a sense of order to the landscape, as if everything is in its proper place. You sip your tea and watch the horses, and the warmth of the drink spreads through your chest, adding to the contentment that has been building all day. After the tea is finished and the cup set aside, you return to the leather pieces. They have rested long enough, and when you touch the surface of the seat, your fingers encounter a leather that is now cool and slightly tacky, the paste having penetrated deeply and begun to set. The tackiness will fade over the next few hours as the oil oxidizes and hardens, leaving behind a surface that is supple but resistant to water. You lift the seat and hold it up to the light, admiring the way the grain now seems to glow from within, the color rich and even. The other pieces you examine in turn, and each one meets your quiet approval. The side panels are flexible but firm, the arch covers are smooth and dark, the stirrup straps are dense and strong, the girth is pliable and even. The oiling has done its work, and the leather is now fully prepared for the final assembly that will come tomorrow. You gather the pieces and carry them into the jar, laying them out on the chest beside the wooden saddle tree. The interior of the jar is dim and cool, the felt walls blocking the late afternoon sun, and the leather seems to darken further in the shade. You arrange the pieces in the order they will be attached, the seat on the bottom, the side panels next, the arch covers above, the straps and girth to the side. The saddle tree sits at the head of this arrangement, its pale birchwood a reminder of the structure that will give shape to all these supple components. You run your hand over the wood once more, feeling the smooth curves that you refined earlier in the day, and then you step back and let the pieces rest in the quiet darkness. Outside, the sun is now very low, its lower edge touching the distant line of the horizon, and the sky has burst into color, deep orange and rose, and a pale, translucent yellow that fades into the blue of the upper sky. The clouds, which had been thin and scattered, have gathered along the horizon in a band of purple-grey, their edges rimmed with gold. The light falls across the steppe in long, slanting rays that turn each blade of grass into a thread of gold, and the shadows stretch out endlessly to the east. The shadow of the Djur, now a long dark rectangle that reaches almost to the stream. The air has cooled noticeably, and you pull your felt coat closer around your shoulders as you stand by the fire pit, watching the sunset. The fire has burned down to a bed of coals, glowing orange and pulsing softly in the twilight, and you add a few more dung chips so that it will last into the evening. The sounds of the camp have changed with the fading light. The sheep are settled now, their bleating reduced to an occasional soft call, and the voices of the other families have grown quieter, more subdued. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs, a high, bright sound that carries across the grass, and then a woman's voice answers, low and soothing, and then silence returns. The birds have stopped their daytime calls, and the only constant sound is the wind, which never truly stops but only changes its strength and direction. Tonight it is a gentle breeze, coming from the northwest, carrying the cool smell of distant mountains and the faint sweet scent of the wild flowers that grow along the stream. You stand for a long time in the fading light, your hands in the pockets of your coat, your face turned toward the sunset. There is no hurry to do anything, no task that calls for your attention. The leather is oiled, the frame is ready, the tools are stored, and the evening is yours to rest. Eventually, the last rim of the sun slips below the horizon, and the colors begin to fade, the orange deepening to a dusky purple, and the gold turning to gray. The first stars appear, faint pinpricks of light in the eastern sky, and the temperature drops another degree, enough that you can see your breath as a faint mist when you exhale. You turn and walk back to the Djur, your boots crunching softly on the packed earth, and you duck inside where the fire has been lit and the warmth wraps around you like a blanket. Inside, the Djur is lit by the flickering glow of the dung fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the felt walls. The smell of the fire mixes with the scent of oiled leather which now fills the interior with its rich, waxy presence. You sit on your sleeping pallet, pulling off your felt boots and setting them aside, and you lean back against the rolled blankets, letting your body sink into the soft wool. The leather pieces are visible in the firelight, dark shapes on the chest, and you look at them with a quiet sense of anticipation. Tomorrow they will become a saddle, but tonight they are simply objects resting in the darkness, and you are simply a person resting after a day of work. The fire crackles softly, a log of dung shifting as it burns, and a shower of sparks rises toward the smoke hole, winking out one by one before they reach the sky. You close your eyes, and the sounds of the night wrap around you, the wind outside, the fire within, the distant call of a night bird, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. The day is done, and the saddle waits, and all is as it should be. The morning arrives as a gradual lightening behind the felt walls, the smoke hole brightening from charcoal to soft pearl. You wake without urgency, your body rested after the long sleep, and you lie still for a while under the heavy blanket, listening to the first sounds of the camp. A horse snickers somewhere nearby, a low throaty call that is answered by another further off, and the sound of the stream is a constant whisper beneath the wind. You feel the presence of the saddle pieces even before you rise. They are stacked on the chest near the door. The oiled leather now fully cured and dry to the touch, the pale birchwood frame resting beside them. The day ahead is simple and singular, the final assembly of everything you have prepared, and you rise with the calm knowledge that the work will take exactly as long as it takes. Outside, the morning is cool and clear, the grass still wet with dew. You wash your face at the stream, the cold water tightening your skin and chasing away the last fragments of sleep, and then you walk to the workspace and begin laying out the components. The saddle tree you place in the center of the flattened grass, its pale wood gleaming in the early light. Beside it you arrange the leather pieces, the seat, now a deep rich brown with a subtle matte glow, the side panels, long and supple, the pommel cover and cantle cover, their curved edges burnished dark, the stirrup straps with their iron buckles, the braided girth coiled neatly. The small iron tacks you will use for the attachment are stored in a leather pouch, each one a tiny square-headed nail, and you pour a handful onto the tool mat, counting them out with your fingertip. You also fetch the small wooden hammer, its head wrapped in rawhide to soften its blows, and you set it beside the tacks. Finally, you fill a clay bowl with water from the stream and carry it to the workspace, because the seat must be dampened before it can be stretched over the frame. The water is cold and clear, and it reflects the pale blue of the sky as you set it down on the grass. You settle onto your usual spot, folding your legs beneath you, and you lift the seat piece onto your lap. The leather is firm from the oiling, its surface smooth and cool, and you run your palm over it one more time, feeling the slight texture of the grain. Then you dip a clean cloth into the bowl of water, wring it out so it is damp but not dripping, and you begin to moisten the underside of the seat, the suede surface that will lie against the wood. You work the damp cloth in long, even strokes, watching the leather darken as it absorbs the moisture. The water soaks into the fibers, softening them, making the leather more pliable and willing to stretch. You turn the seat over and dampen the grain side as well, though more lightly, and then you set the cloth aside and lift the wooden frame onto your lap. The saddle tree feels solid and light, its curves familiar to your hands, and you position it so the pommel arch faces away from you and the cantle is against your stomach. The dampened seat you drape over the frame, centering it so the edges overhang evenly on both sides. The leather, now soft and yielding, begins to conform to the shape of the wood under the gentle pressure of your palms. You press down on the center of the seat, feeling the leather sink into the hollow between the two side bars, and you smooth out wood toward the edges, working the material over the pommel arch and the cantle arch with slow, patient hands. The leather stretches, its fibers sliding microscopically against one another, and it molds itself to the frame, taking on the compound curves that will hold a rider. You pull the front edge down over the pommel, tugging gently until the leather lies flat against the wood, and you hold it there with your left hand while your right hand reaches for the first iron tack. You place the tack against the leather at the base of the pommel arch, positioning it so it will enter the thickest part of the birchwood. The small head of the tack is cool between your fingers, and you hold it steady as you pick up the wooden hammer. The first strike is light, just a tap to set the tack into the leather, and the sound is a soft, dull tick that barely disturbs the morning quiet. You strike again, a little harder, and the tack sinks through the damp leather and bites into the wood with a satisfying grip. You strike a third time, and the tack head seats flush against the leather, holding the seat firmly in place. You move your hand along the pommel edge and place a second tack a short distance from the first, then a third, each one driven home with the same measured rhythm, tap, 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 the hammer rising and falling in a slow cadence, the tacks forming a neat row along the front arch. The leather, now anchored at the front, no longer shifts, and you turn the frame around to work on the cantle. The cantle edge you pull down with the same gentle tension, stretching the damp leather until it lies smooth against the wood. The moisture is already beginning to dry in the open air, and the leather is starting to set in its new shape, but there is still time to make adjustments. You run your palm over the seat, checking for any wrinkles or unevenness, and you find a small fold near the right sidebar where the leather has bunched slightly. You lift the edge, pull it taut again, and hold it while you place a tack at the exact point that will prevent the fold from returning. The hammer taps the tack home, and the leather lies flat. You continue around the cantle, spacing the tacks evenly, each one a small dark spot against the rich brown leather, and when the back edge is fully secured, the seat is now a permanent part of the frame, stretched tight and smooth over the wooden arches. The pommel cover comes next, a curved strip that will wrap around the front arch and provide a double layer of protection at the point of greatest wear. You take the piece from the grass and hold it up to the frame, aligning its curve with the pommel. It fits perfectly, its length exactly right to span from one sidebar to the other, and you center it on the arch before you begin to tack it down. The leather is dampened only slightly, just enough to help it grip the underlying seat without sliding, and you smooth it over the pommel with your thumbs, pressing out any air bubbles. The tacks for the cover are smaller than those used for the seat, because they only need to hold the cover in place while the leather itself will be further secured by the stirrup straps later. You drive them in with the same patient rhythm, the hammer making a slightly higher pitched tick against the smaller heads, and the pommel cover soon lies snug against the front of the saddle, its edges aligned with the seat beneath. The cantle cover you attach in the same manner, wrapping it over the back arch and tacking it along the lower edge. The curve of the cantle is gentler than the pommel, and the leather settles into place with less tension, its burnished edge gleaming softly in the morning light. You run your finger along the seam where the cover meets the seat, feeling the smooth transition, and you are satisfied that no rough edges remain to catch on a rider's clothing. With both arch covers in place, the saddle now has its full top surface, a continuous expanse of dark brown leather that flows from the high front to the slightly lower back, shaped by the wooden frame beneath. Now the side panels, the long skirts that will hang down and protect the horse's flanks. You lift the first panel and position it against the right sidebar, aligning its top edge with the underside of the seat. The panel drapes downward, its length sufficient to cover the area where the stirrup strap will hang, and its burnished edge adds a finished look to the saddle's profile. You secure it not with tacks, but with stitches, using the awl and a fresh length of waxed sinew. The awl pierces through the panel and into the already stitched edge of the seat, creating a line of holes that you follow with the needle. The stitching is a simple running stitch, faster than the saddle stitch you used for the seat itself, and the needle moves in and out with a steady rhythm that joins the panel to the saddle body. The sinew tightens with each pull, drawing the panels snug against the sidebar, and when you finish the right side, you move to the left and repeat the process. The two panels now hang symmetrically, their surfaces smooth and unadorned, their edges swaying slightly in the breeze like the hem of a coat. The stirrup straps are the next components, the strong double-layered bands you stitched and tested the day before. You take the first strap and thread its buckle end through the iron ring that is set into the front of the sidebar, a ring that the woodworker carved a recess for and secured with a pin of hardened horn. The strap passes through the ring and then doubles back, the tongue of the buckle fitting into one of the adjustment holes you punched earlier. You pull the strap taut, testing the hold, and the leather creaks softly as it settles against the iron. The stirrup itself, a simple iron hoop with a flat bottom, you will attach later, but for now the straps hang from the saddle in long loops, their ends nearly touching the grass. The left strap you attach in the same way, and then you step back to see the saddle from a distance. The stirrup straps transform the piece. Now it is clearly a saddle, an object meant for riding, and the sight of it stirs a quiet satisfaction in your chest. The girth is the final piece, the wide braided band that will encircle the horse and hold the saddle steady. You uncoil it from the grass and run it through your hands, one last time, feeling the smooth weave and the subtle flexibility of the belly leather. The girth attaches to the saddle by means of two leather loops sewn into the side panels near the front, loops you made from the offcuts and stitched in place while attaching the panels. You thread one end of the girth through the right loop and tie it off with a secure knot, then pass the other end through the left loop, leaving the long center section to hang in a gentle curve. The girth is not cinched tight now, because there is no horse to receive it, but it lies in place, ready for the day when it will be pulled firm against warm hide and hair. With the girth in place, the saddle is complete. You sit back on your heels and look at it. The object before you on the grass is a unity now, every piece connected to every other piece. The pale birchwood hidden beneath the rich brown leather, the iron buckles gleaming dully at the sides, the braided girth looping beneath. It is sturdy and functional, made for years of use across the steppe, and yet it has a quiet beauty, a rightness of proportion that pleases the eye without demanding attention. You reach out and run your hand over the seat, from the pommel to the cantle, and the leather is smooth and slightly warm from the sun. The stitches, a faint ridge under your palm. The edges are all burnished and dark, the tacks are driven flush, the straps are strong and true. There is nothing more to add, nothing to adjust. You rise to your feet and lift the saddle with both hands, holding it up against the sky. The weight is moderate, balanced, the frame distributing the mass evenly so that it feels lighter than it is. You turn it over and examine the underside, where the two sidebars will rest on either side of a horse's spine, and you see that the panels are stitched cleanly and the girth loops are secure. The stirrup straps hang straight, their buckles aligned, and when you shake the saddle gently, nothing rattles or shifts. It is solid, a single object rather than a collection of parts, and it is ready for its life. You set the saddle down on the grass, resting it upright so that it faces the open steppe, and you step back. The sun is now low, its journey nearly complete, and the light has turned to that deep golden amber that marks the final hour of the day. The sky is layered with color, pale yellow near the horizon, deepening through orange and pink into a soft lavender at the zenith, and the clouds have gathered in long, thin bands that glow from beneath, as if lit by a distant fire. The wind has softened to a barely perceptible breath, and the grass moves in slow, hypnotic waves, each blade touched with gold. The shadows stretch out endlessly, the shadow of the saddle, a dark silhouette on the green, the shadow of the ger, a long rectangle reaching toward the stream. The air has cooled and you can feel the first hint of evening on your cheeks, the promise of a cold night to come. You sit down on the grass beside the saddle, not to work, but simply to be with it. The flock of sheep is a pale mass on a distant hillside, their herder a motionless figure on his pony, and the horses are moving slowly toward the camp, their dark shapes filing one after another across the rise. The sounds of the camp are subdued now. The murmur of voices, the crackle of a cooking fire, the occasional bark of a dog. A bird calls from somewhere near the stream, a single clear note that hangs in the air and then fades. The saddle sits before you, complete and silent, and you feel a quiet pride that is not loud or boastful, but simply a warmth in your chest, a sense of having made something good. Tomorrow you might begin another saddle, or you might mend a bridle, or you might ride out to check the horses. But none of that matters now. Now there is only this moment, the fading light, the endless sky, the saddle on the grass, and you, and Maker at rest, watching the day come gently to its close,